Imagine sending your child to school, only to receive their lifeless body the next day. The culprit seems to be protected. This was the reality for Kendrick Johnson's family. From the discovery of his body in a gym mat to the shocking revelation of his missing organs during his exhumation, this case is as horrific as it gets. Every detail raises many unanswered questions. Kendrick Johnson was born in October 1995 to Kenneth and Jacqueline Johnson. As the youngest of his siblings, he was the heart of his family, the light that filled their home. His mother described him as the joy of their lives, a boy with an easy smile and natural charm. He was fiercely athletic, a rising star in both football and basketball. Science and math came easily to him, as he had a gift for numbers. Above all, Kendrick had big, unstoppable dreams of making it as a professional football player. However, on January 11, 2013, those dreams were silenced forever. 17-year-old Kendrick was discovered in a way no one could have imagined. His lifeless body was clamped inside a rolled-up wrestling mat in the gymnasium of Lowndes High School in Valdosta, Georgia. The Lowndes County Sheriff's Office ruled his death an accident, claiming Kendrick had fallen inside the mat while reaching for a pair of sneakers. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation conducted an autopsy and concluded that his death was due to positional asphyxia. He had suffocated while trapped upside down. But his parents, Jacqueline and Kenneth Johnson, knew better. Something was wrong. Then the horrifying details began to emerge. On January 9, 2013, the first day back at school after the Christmas break, the students of Lowndes High School settled into their routine. The school had two gymnasiums, an old one and a newer, larger one. In the dim, dusty corner of the old gym stood several large wrestling mats that were rolled tightly and stacked upright. Some students, including Kendrick, stored personal belongings inside the mats to avoid paying locker fees. However, over the break, more mats had been added, altering the arrangement. Lowndes High School followed a block schedule, meaning classes alternated on different days. On Thursday, January 10th, at exactly 1:30 p.m., grainy surveillance footage captured Kendrick walking into the old gym. However, he was never seen leaving. His next class was weightlifting, but he never arrived. Hours passed, the hallways emptied, and the school day ended. He was supposed to come home after a freshman basketball game that evening, but he never did. Calls to his phone rang endlessly into silence. As midnight approached, Jacqueline, his mother, could feel it in her bones. Something was terribly wrong. So, just like any mother would do, she reported him missing. The next morning, January 11th, Jacqueline arrived at the school, her heart pounding with dread. She pleaded with administrators, who printed missing person flyers. Time stretched unbearably thin. Then, at approximately 10:30 a.m. inside the old gym, a group of female students sat on top of the wrestling mats filling out surveys. Something caught their attention, a pair of socks barely visible, peeking out from one of the rolled-up mats. One girl laughed, thinking it was a prank, but curiosity got the better of her. She climbed onto the bleachers, peered down into the mat, and what she saw sent ice through her veins, a body. The laughter stopped, and her scream broke the stillness of the gym. A male student rushed over, his hands trembling as he tried to pull Kendrick out. The moment he touched the body, he recoiled in horror. The stench of decomposition hit like a wave. It was clear that something terrible had happened here. A teacher sprinted forward, and together they knocked the mat over. Kendrick's body slumped forward, his face unrecognizable, grotesquely swollen. The school was thrown into chaos. Administrators initiated a lockdown and directed students to the new gym, distancing them from the alarming situation in the old gym. Amid the turmoil, Jacqueline received devastating news. Her son Kendrick's body had been discovered. He had been alone for 21 hours, suffering in the darkness. However, it is clear that someone knows what truly happened. Shortly after Kendrick was discovered, authorities in Lowndes County quickly questioned every student who had been in the gym at that time. Their accounts were consistent. A video recorded the scene, capturing the disturbing stillness of the gym, blood pooling around Kendrick's head. And two shoes, one next to his feet and the other underneath him. Yet several aspects seemed strange. Kendrick's socks were partly pulled off, and his body was positioned in a way that didn't make sense. The Johnson family rejected the conclusion that their son's death was accidental and sought support from civil rights organizations. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the NAACP became involved. Protests took place, and Kendrick's parents were even arrested for civil disobedience outside the courthouse. The case gained significant attention, as the family believed it was a cover-up. In response to growing public pressure, the Department of Justice launched its own investigation, but that too hit dead ends. One story says that Kendrick was familiar with the old gym at Lowndes High School. Like many other students, he used the rolled-up wrestling mats for storage, hiding his pair of sneakers inside to avoid paying locker fees. This was a routine he had followed many times. On January 10, 2013, surveillance cameras recorded Kendrick walking into the gym alone. No one followed him, and no one witnessed what happened next. However, based on the physical evidence, investigators believe that Kendrick's last moments were marked by a tragic chain of errors. At 5 feet 10 inches, he reached for the mat that contained his shoes, only to find that it had been moved over the holiday break and was now stuck behind several other mats. The space was just out of reach for him. Instead of tipping the mat over, a loud action that might attract attention, he likely decided to climb inside, as he had done on previous occasions. Kendrick gripped the side of the mat with his right hand and lowered himself headfirst, reaching out with his left to grab his shoe inside. However, as he went deeper, there wasn't enough room for him to bend his elbow and pull himself back up. He began to panic as his muscles strained. Eventually, he lost his grip on the mat's edge and slid further down, becoming fully inverted. His shoulders got stuck against the walls of the mat, trapping him. The more he struggled, the harder it became to move due to gravity working against him. He tried to shift his weight and may have attempted to kick himself free, but in the process, he lost the shoes he was wearing. They fell near his feet. Blood rushed to his head, the world around him darkened, and his lungs were compressed under his own weight, leading to a drop in oxygen levels. Trapped and helpless, he suffocated in silence, alone in a gym filled, just out of reach of help. Kendrick remained in the mat unnoticed for nearly 21 hours. No one questioned his absence until his mother reported him missing. By then, it was too late. When he was discovered the next morning, rigor mortis had already set in. The cause of death was ruled as accidental positional asphyxia, a tragic mistake that became fatal. Positional asphyxia is a hidden and dangerous condition. It occurs when a person's body gets stuck in a position that makes it hard to breathe, leading to suffocation. Unlike the typical struggle associated with choking, positional asphyxia results in a slow and painful death. The victim might not realize they are in trouble until it's too late. This usually happens when someone cannot escape from a cramped space, such as being trapped between furniture, stuck in a vehicle, or, as in Kendrick's case, when the body is twisted in a way that compresses the chest or limits lung expansion, breathing becomes shallow, oxygen levels drop, and the person may lose consciousness. If help does not arrive soon enough, death is certain. Medical reports from other cases of positional asphyxia show similar patterns. Victims are often found in awkward positions, with signs of suffocation such as blood coming from the mouth and nose, skin discoloration, and fluid in the lungs. What is particularly chilling about these deaths is how easily they can be misinterpreted. In Kendrick's case, it is a fact that he was discovered upside down in a gym mat. However, his family believes the official account is flawed. Since the time of his discovery, the Johnsons have maintained that Kendrick did not climb into the mat by himself, did not fall, and did not suffocate accidentally. He was murdered. Their pursuit of the truth has uncovered a complex cover-up that, even years later, continues to obscure the reality of what happened. From the beginning, there were clear inconsistencies in the case. One major issue was the handling of the investigation. The coroner, responsible for overseeing the body and crime scene, wasn't called for almost 6 hours, which violates Georgia law. By the time he arrived, the gym was no longer secured, meaning any evidence present had likely been tampered with. When Lowndes County authorities quickly declared Kendrick's death an accident, it was surprising. The medical examiner from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation attributed the cause of death to positional asphyxia, ruling out any foul play. The placement of Kendrick's body also raised suspicions. His arms were in unnatural positions, one above his head and the other bent at his side. If he had truly been reaching for his shoes, both arms would have been pointed downwards. The way the gym mats were stacked made it nearly impossible for him to have accidentally fallen into them. Furthermore, if he had somehow climbed inside, how did his shoes end up neatly on top of his legs instead of underneath him? There were also concerning traces of blood, a streak on a nearby wall and a pool beneath his head. However, authorities never tested the blood, dismissing it as old and unrelated to the case. Additionally, there were issues concerning his organs that warranted further examination. Months later, Kendrick's parents faced the difficult decision of exhuming his body to conduct an independent autopsy, driven by their need for answers that they believed had been withheld from them. Upon examination, they discovered something horrifying: his internal organs were missing and had been replaced with newspapers. Officials later claimed this was a standard practice due to decomposition, but it only fueled the family's suspicions. While the Georgia Bureau of Investigation had previously classified Kendrick's death as an accident caused by positional asphyxia, the new autopsy suggested a much more violent cause. It indicated clear signs of blunt force trauma to the neck, suggesting that Kendrick had not simply suffocated but had been struck hard enough to cause his death. Two different autopsies led to two completely different conclusions. Which one was accurate? GBI claims organs were returned to body but discarded by funeral home due to decomposition. What was most unsettling was the delay in notifying the Johnson family about their son's death. Kendrick's body was found in the morning, but his family was informed much later. As they sought answers, law enforcement remained unresponsive, offering only vague explanations. Kendrick's parents were certain about who was responsible for their son's death. They rejected the idea that it was an accident and believed he had been murdered. They filed a lawsuit naming two brothers, Brian and Brandon Bell, who also attended Lowndes High School. Brian has a history of provoking and attacking Kendrick at school. The Johnsons claimed that one of the brothers lured Kendrick to the gym, where he was viciously attacked. They suggested that the motive was a conflict over a girl. However, the Bell family denied any wrongdoing. School records indicated that one brother was out of town the day Kendrick was last seen, while the other was in a different part of the school. Authorities considered this evidence strong enough to establish the brothers' alibis, but the Johnsons remained skeptical and believed the evidence had been tampered with to protect the Bell family. The accusations continued to escalate. Some answers might have been hidden in the surveillance footage from the cameras positioned in Lowndes High School's old gym, the location where Kendrick Johnson was found dead. However, that crucial information was missing. Forensic video analysts examined the school's surveillance videos and uncovered troubling findings. As examined the video files more closely, they uncovered increasingly troubling findings. Some recordings were corrupted and could not be played, while others were processed incorrectly, resulting in significant image loss. A total of 1 hour and 5 minutes of footage was missing from 2 cameras in the gym, including Kendrick's last moments. Additionally, 2 other cameras had an even larger amount of time missing, an alarming 2 hours and 10 minutes. Then, at exactly 1:09 p.m., the footage resumes, showing Kendrick entering the gym. However, the most essential evidence in the case is completely missing. To make matters worse, it was discovered that the timestamps on the cameras were inconsistent. The cameras within the gym seemed to be operating 10 minutes ahead of those outside, leading to a disjointed timeline that could easily be manipulated. A camera outside the gym captured something significant. During the hour of missing footage, many students entered the gym. Did they witness anything? Were they questioned, or were they involved in something that needed to be concealed? What should have been a clear and undeniable record of Kendrick's last moments had instead become an empty digital space. The situation was that law enforcement did not take control of the video system right away. Instead, they relied on the school's IT department to choose which footage to share. Unfortunately, this is precisely what occurred. A school employee, not an investigator, accessed the footage and provided it to the police 5 days after Kendrick's body was discovered. By that time, the footage could have been altered, deleted, or replaced. Somewhere within those missing minutes, corrupted files, and altered timestamps lies the truth about Kendrick's case. If that truth was recorded, someone ensured it would remain hidden from view. However, experts countered that a systemic error explained the anomaly and that the SCLC found no cover-up. There was no conclusive evidence to support the intervention. Why were so many leads overlooked? Why did the Bells seem untouchable? The Johnson family believed this was due to the father's influential connections. As the Johnsons sought answers, law enforcement insisted that Kendrick's death was an accident. When the family accused the sheriff's office and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation of mishandling the case, officials rejected their claims as unfounded. Nevertheless, unsettling information continued to emerge. A coroner's report criticized the investigation for being poorly managed and pointed out that Kendrick's body had been moved before authorities arrived. In 2015, determined to find the truth, the Johnsons filed a lawsuit against the Bell brothers and over 30 other defendants, including law enforcement officers, school officials, and medical examiners. They claimed that the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office staged the crime scene and placed Kendrick's body inside a mat to simulate an accident. However, their case struggled due to the absence of eyewitnesses, concrete evidence, and confessions. Despite this, many questions remained. Investigators stood firm, with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation dismissing any homicide claims based on a regional crime lab report that found no significant injuries on Kendrick's body. In November 2015, the Justice Department filed a motion in the civil case to intervene and stay the case. The U.S. Attorney said that allowing discovery to continue in the civil case would have a disincentive effect on the federal investigation, which had expanded to include possible obstruction and jury tampering. After the Justice Department's motion was dismissed, Johnson's parents dismissed their own wrongful death lawsuit, saying they hoped to refile after the federal investigation was concluded. They were subsequently sued for more than $850,000 in attorney's fees and $1 million in defamation damages. Johnson's family requested a second exhumation of his body and was granted permission by Valdosta city officials. On June 22, 2018, Johnson's body was exhumed. In June 2018, Kendrick Johnson's body was exhumed for a third autopsy, conducted by Dr. William R. Anderson at Forensic Dimensions in Orlando, Florida. The examination concluded that Kendrick's death resulted from non-accidental blunt force trauma to the right neck and chest, suggesting he was struck with significant force, contradicting the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's positional asphyxia ruling. The report noted hemorrhaging and soft tissue damage inconsistent with accidental suffocation, reinforcing the second autopsy's findings of murder. Despite some organs still missing, as observed in 2013, no new conclusions addressed this issue. The Johnson family views this as further evidence of foul play. On March 10, 2021, the case was officially reopened by Lowndes County Sheriff Ashley Polk. Polk offered a $500,000 reward of his own money for information leading to the conviction of whoever killed Kendrick Johnson. According to Polk, he and 2 other investigators studied the case for 13 months before reaching their conclusion. In January 2022, the second investigation concluded with no charges filed. Polk announced a conclusion that there was no murder, no cover-up, no conspiracy in the teenager's January 2013 death. It was simply a tragic and bizarre accident. Polk stated that he would not claim that there was anything wrong with the original investigation or that the original investigation's conclusion of an accidental death was wrong. The sheriff also stated that he was not treating the case as a homicide. He further stated that the 2 brothers, who were named in previous legal actions by the Johnsons, were not suspects. The Johnson family has spent nearly 10 years seeking answers, filing lawsuits, organizing protests, and highlighting the corruption they believe exists in Valdosta, Georgia. Kendrick's father, Kenneth, expressed their frustration. In their quest for truth, they have exhumed Kendrick's body twice, hoping to find new evidence. Despite spending thousands of dollars to uncover the truth, every time they make progress, the case seems to regress. Although the Justice Department initiated a federal investigation, the results were never disclosed, and the courts dismissed important lawsuits for lack of evidence. Meanwhile, the media and the community have moved on, but Kendrick's parents continue to fight, convinced that their son was murdered and that the truth is being concealed. What really happened? Was it a tragic accident or a hidden murder? To this day, no one has clear answers, neither those who have been following the case nor Kendrick Johnson's family. Years have gone by, yet the truth is still out of reach, obscured by missing video footage, inconsistent reports, and hints of a cover-up. Justice remains elusive, and the silence surrounding Kendrick's death. Will Kendrick Johnson's family ever receive the answers they seek, or will the truth remain buried forever? In February 2025, the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit revived the Johnson family's legal battle by ordering a Georgia federal court to reconsider the dismissal of their 2023 lawsuit against the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office, Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and others. The district court, led by Judge Lee Martin May, had dismissed the case, arguing that entities like the Sheriff's Office and school board were not suable and that claims against individuals lacked specificity. The appeals panel upheld May's refusal to recuse herself but ruled that the Johnsons could amend their complaint to name proper defendants, such as individual officials or districts, potentially correcting legal errors. This decision, while not guaranteeing success, offers the Johnsons a renewed chance to seek accountability for Kendrick's death, alleging a conspiracy to conceal the truth. The case now returns to the U.S. Northern District of Georgia for further review, keeping the family's pursuit of justice alive. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Ted Shaughnessy. Ted Shaughnessy, born on February 7, 1963, is the youngest of 3 children. His family lived near Phoenix, Arizona. From a young age, all the siblings in the family developed a love for fast cars. Ted dreamed of owning sports cars and was passionate about everything related to them. Relatives and friends described Ted as a kind and fun-loving person. In the early 1980s, he met a woman named Corey at a hair salon in Phoenix. They began dating, and in the late 1980s they got married. The couple later moved to Austin, Texas, where they started a jewelry business together. Corey had a deep passion for gems and fine arts, and worked as an appraiser in their family business. In contrast, Ted was friendly and approachable, easily building relationships with customers and partners, which helped secure profitable deals while keeping everyone happy. Their family business continued to grow, and they bought a new house near their store. By 2000, the couple still had no children. In the spring of 2000, they traveled to Ukraine and adopted a 1.5-year-old boy, whom they named Nick. This moment marked the long-awaited beginning of parenthood for the family. Over the years, Nick grew up and developed a love for fast cars, just like his father. To share these experiences, Nick and Ted often went go-karting together, and Ted also took his son for rides in a sports car. Over time, Nick began to show an aptitude for business. He started selling chocolate bars from his school locker and always had pocket money. While in high school, he developed a hobby of disassembling cars. In 2015, he met a girl named Jackie Edison, who had recently moved to Texas from New York. The two were immediately attracted to each other, but Nick's parents, Ted and Corey, disapproved of Jackie, feeling that she was not the right person for him. However, they chose not to interfere in the relationship in order to maintain a good relationship with Nick. After high school, the couple moved into a house near a university. Jackie planned to study engineering, while Nick pursued a business degree. During this time, Nick also became interested in trading. Despite living far from home, he still made the 2-hour trip to Austin every weekend to visit his parents. Life seemed to be on track, and there was no sign of trouble ahead. Early in the morning of March 2, 2018, at 4:30 a.m., Ted and Corey were awakened by the sound of their dog barking. This was not unusual, as dogs often react to possums or other small animals that sometimes wander onto the family property. Corey believed there was no reason to worry. Ted decided to go check out the disturbance. Since the couple lived in Texas, he brought his .45 caliber pistol for protection. According to Corey, she quickly fell asleep after Ted left to investigate. However, just a few minutes later, she was awakened by a loud bang coming from the kitchen, followed by several more. Panicking, Corey grabbed the gun she had left by the bed and ran to help her husband. As she stepped out of the bedroom, she noticed their dog. Suddenly, she was shot while standing in the doorway, and a dark figure appeared, looking menacing. In a panic, Corey fired all 6 bullets from her pistol toward the door, unsure of who or what was there. After firing, she ran into the closet to hide, fearing for her life and expecting the intruder to find her and shoot her. While in the closet, she grabbed her phone and called 911. She reported that someone had broken into the house and that she had shot one of the attackers. During the call, Corey heard faint moaning coming from somewhere in the house. She couldn't identify who was making the sound. Worried that her husband might have been injured in the gunfight, she felt an overwhelming urge to go help him. However, the police insisted that she stay in the closet, warning her that it might be too dangerous to leave. 15 minutes later, Corey was notified that the police had arrived at her house. By then, the moaning had stopped, and an eerie silence had fallen over the house. Cautiously, Corey walked out of the closet and toward the front door. As she passed through the kitchen, she saw her husband, Ted, lying motionless on the floor, surrounded by bullet casings. Overwhelmed with shock, Corey tried to open the front door, but found no one there. It turned out that the police had gone to the wrong house. At the time, they were at a neighbor's house, trying to determine where the gunshots had come from. They eventually realized their mistake and rushed to Corey's house, where they found her trembling on the doorstep. The officers quickly got back into their car and drove to Corey's home, arriving around 8 a.m. There, they met Corey, who was deeply distressed and struggling to process the events that had unfolded. Although still in shock and uncertain about the details, she knew her husband had died. Over the next 3 months, Corey's son Nick and his girlfriend Jackie moved in with her to provide support. Friends and acquaintances of the family were horrified by the tragedy. Ted was described as a kind and hard-working man who had built his life with integrity and deserved to spend his later years in peace. No one believed he had any enemies capable of such a violent act. Speculation soon arose that the motive for the attack might have been linked to the family's wealth, as their home contained many valuable items. Police examined the crime scene and found 2 different types of ammunition, suggesting there were 2 attackers, each using a different handgun. There were no signs of forced entry, but police discovered an open window in a distant bedroom, where a surveillance camera had been removed. It appeared the attackers had entered the house through this window. A forensic scientist discovered fingerprints at the scene, which were immediately sent to a lab for analysis. In the room where Nick had been staying, police found a chest of drawers that had previously held a .40 caliber handgun. However, the gun was missing and turned out to be the only item stolen from the house. Since the caliber matched one of the guns used in the shooting, police suspected it was the murder weapon. After interviewing the Corey family and their neighbors, police learned that the family owned a high-value jewelry store, which was well known in the area. Corey, her son Nick, and Jackie surrendered their cell phones to assist in the investigation. Nick, who had an alibi because he was 2 hours away from his parents' home at the time of the attack, supported his story with phone records and the security system he had installed at his parents' house. However, the security system had been turned off on the night of the shooting, which immediately raised suspicions. Nick explained that this was not unusual, as his parents sometimes left the system off when they were both at home. Nevertheless, even when the system was in sleep mode, it still recorded some activity. Police discovered that the criminals likely broke into the house at 4:27 a.m., which was the exact time the system was disabled. The next signal from the system was recorded at 4:44 a.m., giving the criminals only about 17 minutes to search the house. Rumor had it that the house contained millions of dollars worth of jewelry, gold, safes, and other valuables. However, Nothing appeared to have been stolen, making robbery an unlikely motive. Adding to the mystery was the strange behavior of the family dogs. How could they neither hear nor smell the intruders and fail to alert the family for 17 minutes? Dogs would normally bark even if an unfamiliar car stopped in the driveway. Clearly, something was wrong. The first person the police suspected was Corey. Suspicion fell on her because she was the sole beneficiary of Ted's life insurance policy, which was set to pay her $1 million. Shortly after her husband's death, she contacted the insurance company to file a claim. She argued that, after her husband's death, the company he managed began to face serious challenges. Sales dropped significantly, customers left, and delivery problems arose, creating an urgent need for money. However, the insurance company denied her claim because she was already a suspect in her husband's murder. This was how Corey found out she was under investigation, much to her outrage. Nick and his girlfriend Jackie were also considered suspects. When the police searched Nick and Jackie's home, they discovered a marriage certificate. It turned out that the young couple had secretly married 8 months earlier, without informing their parents. Nick's mother only learned about the marriage through the police, which shocked her. Corey gave Jackie a piece of gold jewelry adorned with diamonds as a wedding gift. Shortly after, Nick and his wife took over the family jewelry store. These changes seemed to help Corey cope with the pain of his loss. Meanwhile, the police received the results of the fingerprint analysis from the window of the Corey family home. The fingerprints were found to belong to the installer who had installed the window years ago and had not returned since. This man lived in Minnesota, not Texas, and had a solid alibi. However, the police could not disregard the window, as it appeared to be the most logical point of entry for the perpetrator. During an interrogation, one of the officers noticed that Nick repeatedly mentioned using the window to enter his house when he came home drunk from a party, or when he did not want to wake his sleeping parents. Interestingly, the police had not told him that this could have been how the intruder entered the house. In another interview, Nick mentioned his best friend, Spencer Patterson. The two had been close for years, and Spencer frequently visited Nick's family home. Spencer, who came from a poor background and disliked his job, may have secretly envied Nick, who was wealthier and more fortunate. Nick had told Spencer that a particular window in the house was often left unlocked, which the police believed could have been the intruder's entry point. Spencer was also familiar with the layout of the house, including the location of the family safe and gun boxes. During one of the interviews, Nick revealed that he had previously given Spencer a .380 caliber pistol. This detail raised suspicion because cartridges of the same caliber were found at the scene of the massacre, linking it to one of the murder weapons. The police decided to question Spencer, who admitted that he was familiar with the window in question and had visited Nick's house several times. Spencer also handed over the .380 caliber pistol that Nick had given him. However, after conducting a ballistics test, it was confirmed that the gun was not used in the murder, proving that Spencer was not involved in the case. Spencer, however, pointed the police toward another, more likely suspect, Nick. The police could not ignore the fact that Nick was eager to propose numerous theories about the case, none of which proved useful. This raised suspicions about whether he was involved in Ted's death. Throughout the investigation, Nick's behavior drew attention. The day after the murder, he independently questioned the neighbors as if he were taking over the investigation. When the police conducted fingerprint and DNA tests on everyone present in the house, Nick's behavior was notably strange. It was discovered that Nick was experiencing significant financial difficulties. His business ventures were unprofitable, and he had spent all the money his parents had given him. Nick's independent projects had stalled, and he showed no intention of finding a job. For a long time, his parents had supported him, covering all his expenses, but they had hoped he would eventually become self-sufficient. Just before the tragedy, Nick's parents had loaned him $30,000 with the intention of funding his future college education. However, instead of pursuing his studies, he spent the money on trading, as he had always done. Disappointed, his parents decided to stop supporting him financially, hoping this would motivate him to take responsibility and start building his own career and life. To reinforce this, they asked Nick and Jackie to live separately. His parents believed that living apart from his girlfriend might encourage him to consider college, much like Jackie. Instead, Nick borrowed another $5,000 from a family friend and continued gambling it all on trading. He ultimately failed and never repaid the loan. Police suspect that these financial troubles may have been the motive for the attack. However, Nick had an alibi. It seemed likely that he did not personally shoot his father, so the police needed to determine who had committed the crime. The police returned to Nick and Jackie's home. This time, they found several bullet boxes, with the brand and caliber of the bullets matching those found at the crime scene. The investigation also uncovered another lie. Nick had previously claimed that he had not visited his parents' home for a long time, but the police discovered that he had been there just a few days before the tragedy. Although Nick denied this, the police obtained irrefutable evidence proving he had lied. Another suspicious detail emerged. 2 days before the attack on Ted, there was an unusual gap in the communication records between Nick and Jackie. The two had been in regular contact via phone and text, but during this particular period, they had stopped communicating entirely. When their cell phones were examined, it became clear that the devices had been deliberately wiped clean shortly before the investigation began. Many messages had been edited or deleted, and the phones had been factory reset. However, they had overlooked the fact that all the data had been backed up on a computer. The reason behind their hasty attempt to clean the phones soon became clear. Turns out the couple was facing much more serious financial troubles than Nick had disclosed to his parents. The police decided to question Spencer again, suspecting that he was withholding information. Spencer eventually confessed that, shortly before Ted was murdered, Nick had approached him with an offer to pay him to carry out a murder. The plan was to kill both of Nick's parents. If the plan succeeded, Nick would inherit about $8 million, including business assets. Spencer revealed that he had been promised a share of the money. However, Spencer refused to commit the crime, prompting Nick to threaten to kill him if he revealed anything about the plan. Corey, shocked and refusing to believe the accusations, hired Austin's best lawyer to defend Nick. She believed that Nick had been victimized by the same arbitrary police actions she had experienced during the initial investigation. On May 29, 2018, Nick and Jackie were arrested for solicitation of murder, a crime punishable by death under state law. 2 months later, Jackie was released on bail. Corey had hoped that Nick would soon be cleared and released, but the situation took a drastic turn when the investigation exposed the real culprits. Police reviewed surveillance footage from the house, dated February 28, which showed 2 unidentified men. One of them was later identified as Cameron Vosmek, an employee of a window company whose fingerprints had been found early in the investigation. Upon contacting the window company, authorities confirmed Cameron's identity. When police visited his home again, Cameron was absent. Instead, they spoke to his wife, who immediately admitted she knew the reason for their visit. She revealed that her husband had denied any involvement in the crime, but implicated his co-worker, 25-year-old Johnny Leon. When police located Johnny, he initially denied any wrongdoing, but eventually confessed. Johnny revealed that Nick had offered him $100,000 to kill someone close to him. Johnny admitted to being an accomplice, overwhelmed with guilt to the point of requesting the death penalty for himself. He confessed to using a .40 caliber gun provided by Nick, a weapon that had previously been reported missing from Ted's home. Police further discovered that Nick had disabled the security system on the property. This revelation horrified Corey, who now faced the devastating reality of her son's true nature. She realized that for 3 months after Ted's death, she had unknowingly lived under the same roof as the person who had plotted to kill her. Nick attempted to justify his actions, claiming that his father had been suffering from chronic depression and that he was merely aiding his father by ending his life. Corey staunchly refuted Nick's claim, asserting that Ted had no history of mental health issues. Meanwhile, Nick's wife, Jackie, denied any involvement in the crime, claiming ignorance of her husband's plans. Jackie initially refused to cooperate with the police and sought to avoid responsibility. However, it later emerged that she had been aware of Nick's intentions. Jackie claimed she had tried to dissuade Nick from proceeding with the crime, but her statement was met with skepticism. Although she could have warned the police, Jackie chose not to. Jackie eventually agreed to cooperate with the investigation, which earned her release on bail. She testified against Nick, resumed her college education, and returned to her daily life. Meanwhile, authorities identified the second accomplice in Ted's murder as Ariane Smith. Despite the severity of their crimes, Nick Shaughnessy, Johnny Leon, and Ariane Smith avoided the death penalty by striking plea deals with the prosecution. In April 2021, they each pleaded guilty to lesser charges and were sentenced to 35 years in prison, with the possibility of parole. As of June 2023, all three remain incarcerated. Jackie received a much lighter sentence for her cooperation. She served 4 months in prison and was placed on 10 years of probation. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Krista Waninger. On May 2, 1963, a tragic event occurred on Via Emilia in Rome when police were called to an apartment building after witnesses reported finding an injured girl. 2 police officers arrived at the apartment building and went up to the 4th floor. In the hallway between apartments 14 and 15, they discovered a blonde woman in a blue coat lying unconscious in a large pool of blood, her eyes wide with horror. Several people had gathered around her, including a shocked janitor and a young neighbor who worked at a medical center. The neighbor checked the victim's pulse, performed CPR, and did everything she could to keep the girl alive until an ambulance arrived. One of the neighbors called an ambulance, but by the time it arrived, it was too late. The girl was dead. The victim was identified as Krista Waninger, 23. She had come to Rome in search of success and fame, but tragically, she had been fatally stabbed 7 times. The police immediately began questioning neighbors and witnesses to piece together what had happened. However, no one had witnessed the attack, not even the residents of apartments 14 and 15. The police knocked on the doors of both apartments, and Gerda Hodap came out. When asked by the police about Krista, she stated that they were friends. They had planned to meet, but Krista was attacked and stabbed just steps away from Gerda's apartment. The attack occurred at 2:50 p.m., and Gerda claimed that she had been taking a nap and had not heard anything unusual. While Krista was brutally murdered behind closed doors, it caused quite a commotion on their floor. Her explanation seemed implausible. The doorman informed the police that Krista did not live in the building. They knew each other because the victim frequently visited Gerda's apartment. The murder had occurred nearby. After investigating a few blocks away, the police went to Krista's house, which appeared to be quite empty. Meanwhile, Gerda was taken to the police station for questioning while the authorities carefully examined the crime scene. Under the doorknob of Gerda's apartment, the police discovered a bloody handprint, indicating that Krista had tried to call for help. The building's doorman recalled that when he heard a woman scream, he quickly ran up the stairs. On his way, he encountered a strange man coming down who seemed startled to see him. At first, the doorman did not pay much attention to the strange man. However, he later suspected that there was a connection between this man and the case. When the doorman arrived at the scene, several residents from nearby apartments had gathered. They found Krista lying in a large pool of blood, her breathing irregular and her condition deteriorating. The witnesses were all in a state of panic and did not know how to help. Gerda, who was present at the police station, was willing to share any information she had about her friend Krista. She seemed genuinely concerned about the attack and did not understand why anyone would want to harm Krista. They had been friends for a long time, supporting each other in their modeling and acting careers. Gerda said that Krista was supposed to arrive at around 3 p.m., but she had been feeling unwell that day and had taken sleeping pills, which caused her to miss the attack. Although Gerda spoke about her sleep problems, she could not remember the name of the pills she had taken or explain why she had not canceled her meeting with Krista despite having gone to bed. The police found Gerda's story suspicious. Krista had suffered serious injuries, including 7 stab wounds, 3 of which were in the chest. The attacker had used a large knife to assault Krista, leaving her unable to be saved. In addition, Krista had several defensive wounds on her arms. The forensic expert observed that all of the wounds appeared to have been inflicted from above, indicating that the attacker was tall. In interviews with witnesses, it was confirmed that a man, described as unknown, had fled the scene shortly before the police arrived. Several people, including the concierge, reported seeing a tall man in a blue jacket leaving the building shortly after the attack. Using the descriptions of the witnesses, a composite sketch was created and subsequently published in newspapers and broadcast on television. The police reconstructed the timeline of events, determining that Krista left her apartment at approximately 2 p.m. and planned to return at 5 p.m. Before the appointment, she had visited a friend. About 30 minutes later, she arrived at Gerda's house, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and was attacked on the stairs. It is believed that the attacker knew Krista and was waiting for her. Police initially suspected her friend Gerda because of her strange behavior during the attack. A neighbor reported that she had called Gerda's apartment and heard someone moving around behind the door, but no one answered, perhaps out of fear. The police suspected that Gerda was withholding information. Gerda insisted that no one rang the doorbell until the police arrived and claimed that she had heard nothing until the police knocked. Krista's murder in broad daylight in central Rome caused a media frenzy. The police hoped to gather useful information from the public, but the widespread attention also led to rumors spreading rapidly. The police received dozens of statements, most of which were complex, while others simply restated what was already known. They investigated all known criminals with a history of knife attacks, focusing not only on those who might be hiding in Rome, but also checking neighboring cities, although this effort was fruitless. In the midst of these events, a wave of panic spread throughout the community. People became increasingly afraid to go out, and the police station was flooded with angry calls from locals urging them to arrest the person responsible for Krista's attack. Some callers even made threats to the police, demanding action to ensure the safety of the streets. Meanwhile, Gerda maintained her innocence, calling the police's suspicion of her an insult. The police began to explore other leads, focusing especially on those close to Krista. There were many indications that the perpetrator was connected to Krista, leading the police to believe that the attack may have been motivated by jealousy or personal animosity. Therefore, they looked into the relationships Krista had formed since moving to another country. One notable individual was Krista's boyfriend. He was very jealous and possessive, with evidence suggesting that he had abused Krista on several occasions. Their relationship was tumultuous, often triggered by his unfounded suspicions that Krista was cheating on him with other men. This jealousy may have stemmed from several factors, including Krista's notebook filled with the phone numbers of men in the modeling and acting industries. Her profession required her to socialize and network with many people, and Krista frequently attended social events to promote herself and build valuable relationships, which made her boyfriend feel uncomfortable. He became jealous of every random person she interacted with, and his insecurities led him to become increasingly controlling. Every phone call from a man was viewed as a betrayal, which angered her boyfriend. This pressure caused Krista to decline movie offers and made her financially dependent on him. The police identified 2 suspects: Krista's boyfriend, who had both a motive and a violent streak, and her friend Gerda Hodap, who was near the scene of the murder but claimed not to have seen or heard anything. It is possible that Gerda had a motive for the murder, perhaps wanting to eliminate an attractive rival. However, there is no evidence to support this theory. Journalists constantly intervened, probing for information and asking difficult questions. The police were puzzled by the presence of a strange man in a blue jacket. Although this man appeared at the crime scene and quickly left, he coldly mentioned that there was a woman screaming on the fourth floor, without offering any help. Other witnesses grew suspicious and tried to explain the presence of this stranger. The police concluded that the case might have been carefully planned, with the man in the blue jacket acting as a distraction. However, if that were the case, the criminal would have likely stayed at the crime scene, which raised suspicions about Gerda. Meanwhile, Gerda faced constant interrogations and became a media phenomenon. Journalists pursued her, spreading rumors and portraying her as a monster. The police believed that if Gerda was not involved in the murder, she may have acted as an informant or concealed information. However, to date, there has been no concrete evidence linking her to the case. The police continue to investigate the possibility of a random attack. However, they face a shortage of resources. A search of Krista's inner circle yielded no leads. Her address book contained many phone numbers related to men and various clubs in Rome, as well as organizations connected to modeling and acting. Hundreds of contacts had accumulated over the years. Despite a thorough police investigation, each contact led to a dead end. Gerda remained under close police surveillance. They even took her to the morgue to view Krista's body and observe her reaction. The police noted her emotionless response to their questions. The interrogations were repeated several times. Gerda changed her story, claiming that the doorbell rang when Krista visited. However, the screams that followed frightened her, so she did not open the door. Gerda explained her dishonesty by saying that she felt ashamed for not helping her friend. The police believed that she was a potential accomplice to the crime, suggesting that Krista had been lured there so that her attacker could kill her. Ultimately, the police were unable to obtain a confession that would identify Gerda as the killer, and at most, she could be considered an accomplice. By reconstructing the timeline of events, the police discovered why the janitor had not noticed a strange man entering the building. He had visited the utility room several times during the day. It was a complete coincidence that he had entered just before Krista arrived at the apartment complex. This raised suspicions that the attacker knew exactly when and where Krista would arrive. Several witnesses reported seeing Krista enter the apartment complex alone, unescorted, and without anyone else accompanying her. This led the police to believe that the perpetrator had entered the apartment complex before Krista, just before she arrived. It was suspected that the perpetrator knew which floor she would go to and where to wait for her. After a while, the Krista Waninger murder case yielded no more clues. Public interest in the case also waned, as no similar attacks occurred afterward. People began to calm down, and Krista's case gradually faded into oblivion, largely because her family lived far away in another country. Despite efforts to understand the situation, it was difficult to generate significant interest in the case. Krista's mother and sister actively distributed flyers with her picture in the hope of attracting potential witnesses, but their efforts did not advance the investigation. The investigation into Krista's murder had stalled for 10 months until an anonymous witness contacted a local newspaper. Using a false name, he asked to speak to the editor. The man claimed to be the brother of Krista's killer and offered to sell information to the newspaper for a large sum of money. The journalist who took the call felt that the man's story was more than just a scam to capitalize on the tragedy. Believing that the witness might have accurate information, he decided to contact the police. The journalist carefully communicated with the man, promising to collect the necessary funds to pay him in advance by the evening. They agreed to contact him later to discuss the details. After the call, the journalist went to the police station to report the unusual conversation. The police showed interest in the case, and the journalist agreed to work with them, using special equipment to monitor the incoming call. The anonymous caller contacted the journalist at 19:05. During this call, Two police officers listened in and recorded the conversation. They were able to locate the source of the call. Several police officers then went to the address provided, where they found a 32-year-old man using the phone booth. His name was Guido Pieri. When they saw him, the police immediately recognized that he matched the police sketch of the suspect. He was arrested and searched, and their suspicions were confirmed when they found a 30-centimeter-long knife in his jacket pocket, similar to the weapon used in the attack on Krista. The police believed they had the right suspect. Unfortunately, further examination revealed that Krista was not killed with this knife. Guido Pieri insisted from the beginning that he was only trying to profit from the story, but he was unable to provide any clear information. When the police searched his home, they found another knife, but no blood, and it could not be linked to Krista's wounds. Disturbing notes were found in Guido's home, including 5 notebooks detailing gruesome murders of women. The most alarming was the final story, which was very similar to the case of Krista Waninger. The story included specific details that had not been made public and were known only to the perpetrator, raising suspicions against Guido. Guido Pieri grew up in a family with 4 brothers and 3 sisters. From an early age, he had a strong passion for adventure painting. However, while in vocational school, he decided to drop out and start working, especially after struggling to finish 8th grade 3 times. Although he was not unintelligent, he had obvious problems with self-control. By the age of 18, he was employed as a mechanic in a construction company, maintaining a fleet of equipment. After 10 years, Guido married a much older woman. During this time, he pursued his passion for painting, dreaming of becoming an artist. In February, Guido moved to Paris to pursue this dream, but unfortunately, his efforts ended in disappointment. In his diary, he explained his feelings in detail. It was clear that Guido was a deeply creative individual with a unique perspective on life, but he struggled to manage the challenges he faced and find his own path. He lacked the courage and motivation needed to overcome these obstacles. As a result, Guido moved back to Rome, ended his marriage, and took a job as a secretary at the Institute, where he worked until he was 63. His diaries reveal a disillusioned man full of ambitions and ideas that he was unable to turn into reality. When the police questioned him about the notes they discovered during the search, Guido explained that they were ideas for a future novel, as he longed to write a book. When reviewing the notes, the police noticed many similarities to the real-life case of Krista Waninger. Details of the crime scene and descriptions of the people involved closely resembled the apartment building and surrounding area where Krista was murdered. This raised questions about whether these accounts referred to her murder, which aroused suspicions among the police. Guido led a seemingly normal life, frequenting upscale restaurants and bars. However, he remained on the police radar, having been spotted at several other violent crime scenes unrelated to Krista. Unfortunately, he did not confess or provide any evidence of his innocence. At that time, witnesses who had seen a suspicious man in a blue jacket leaving the apartment building after hearing Krista scream had not yet testified. 3 of the 4 witnesses identified him as Guido. Despite ongoing questioning and suspicion, no physical evidence was found linking him to the crime. The police decided to return all the confiscated diaries belonging to Guido, and he was released. During this time, Krista's sister pushed for the investigation to be reopened. The police reviewed all relevant information, but this lead did not yield any results. Guido remained the prime suspect, but he did not confess. Despite having no evidence to present, the police continued to investigate and put pressure on him. Surprisingly, Guido Pieri went to the police station and confessed to killing Krista Waninger. He was arrested, and it took a year before the trial began. Despite his confession, he was acquitted due to a lack of sufficient evidence. His lawyer argued that Guido had mental health problems and pointed out that he refused to confess again. By this time, he had been officially diagnosed with schizophrenia, which led the police to consider his confession unreliable. There were 2 more hearings. In both trials, Guido Pieri was found guilty, but he was released on bail due to his mental condition. Guido later changed his story, claiming that he had been at the scene of the murder by accident and denied any guilt. In addition, Guido destroyed his own notebooks, containing disturbing notes that could have been used against him. During the psychiatric evaluation, he was found to be insane. Therefore, the court could only order Guido to undergo treatment for schizophrenia. Despite his crime, he was allowed to go free without any apparent motive. For a long time, he was considered a threat to society, but there was not enough evidence to prove it. He was eventually released and deemed harmless, much to the shock of Krista's family. Sadly, Krista's relatives were never able to obtain justice or see Guido incarcerated. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case, the case of Cassie Jo Stoddart. We will explore the tragic story of Cassie Jo Stoddart, a high school senior from Pocatello, Idaho, whose murder was influenced by the movie Scream. Let's go back to 2006, when the Scream franchise was at its peak. Even though the first film was released in 1996, long before Cassie's murder. Cassie was an honor student at her high school in Pocatello. She attended classes with her boyfriend, Matt Beckham, and her friends, Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk, and they often spent their free time together. Cassie was a beautiful young girl with long, flowing dark hair, embodying both beauty and intelligence. In a 2016 interview with Idaho Magazine, Cassie's brother Andrew Stoddart described her as artistic, with a passion for drawing and music. She was a great role model and a typical girl. Cassie's classmates and friends, Brian and Tori, were very interested in the horror movie Scream and other similar films. They also enjoyed making their own videos, with Brian often filming Cassie. Eventually, Brian and Tori began recording discussions about murders. In one recording, Brian said, "We've already found a victim, and maybe it's our girl. You know, we need a sacrifice, and we have to go for it. She will be the first on the list. She'll be all alone in a big dark house." This particular video was filmed on September 2, 2006, and the audio was later found on a videotape that was given to the police, along with other evidence for the murder case. Brian's lawyer argued that this tape should be disregarded since the friends were merely creating a horror film. That night, Cassie was supposed to stay home to care for her aunt and uncle's pets while they were away on business. She invited her boyfriend Matt over to watch movies and keep her company to avoid feeling bored and lonely. Cassie's mother had prohibited her from bringing guests over, but she still told Matt to come. Later on, Brian and Tori showed up, even though she hadn't invited them. They all chatted together and took her uncle's dogs for a walk to keep them calm. To minimize noise, Cassie eventually locked the dogs in a room and the boys started goofing around. At one point, Brian and Tori decided to leave the house where Matt and Cassie were and go to the movie theater instead of watching Kill Bill 2. According to court records from the 6th Judicial District Court of Idaho, they got into Tori's red car and drove away. They stopped alongside the road to park, then got out to change into dark pants, shirts, gloves, and white masks. Both of them also grabbed large knives. Afterward, they drove back and parked near the house again. Dressed in their costumes and armed with knives, they walked down the driveway toward the house. To enter, they broke a basement window. Once inside, Brian and Tori began making noise by stomping and banging, trying to lure Cassie and Matt downstairs to scare them. They created chaos by throwing objects and breaking things. Then, they found the circuit box and switched off the lights in the house. After some time, they turned the lights back on, but Cassie and Matt still did not come downstairs. Meanwhile, they heard that Matt's mother had arrived to take him home. At 10:30 p.m., Matt started to feel uneasy, claiming that something strange was happening with the lights in the house. His mother suggested that Cassie spend the night at their place, but Cassie declined, saying she needed to take the dogs out early. Matt left with his mother, leaving Cassie alone. Once he was gone, the guys turned off the electricity again and went back upstairs. At the top of the stairs, Brian opened a closet door to make noise and scare Cassie. Meanwhile, the dogs were growling behind a door in the room as Brian and Tori entered the living room, where Cassie was lying on the couch. When she saw them, she jumped up and asked who they were. Tori moved in front of Brian and approached Cassie, who shouted that she wasn't scared of them and could handle them herself. Brian heard Cassie's screams and saw Tori raise a knife and attack her multiple times. She collapsed to the floor, making a gurgling sound. Tori turned to Brian and said, "I know what I did. We have to kill her." He then stabbed Cassie several more times. "I just killed Cassie, this isn't a joke. I stabbed her in the throat and I watched her lifeless body fall. I killed her." It all felt surreal to Brian, but everything happened so quickly. "We need to act fast," he said to Tori as they were in the car. Tori and Brian were celebrating, shouting, "We did it. It was so easy." The group in Tori's car visited his house but didn't stay long. They first entered the garage, where they took blue garbage bags. After removing their costumes, they packed the costumes and knives into the bags and changed into pre-prepared street clothes. They also grabbed a bottle of liquid and placed everything in the back seat of Tori's car before leaving the garage. On their way, they bought matches and drove to Black Rock Canyon. There, they went down a trail to try to burn the bag containing the costumes and knives. However, the liquid wasn't very flammable, so the items wouldn't catch fire. As a result, Tori and Brian dug a hole and buried everything, covering it with branches. Afterward, they drove around the area for a while before returning to Tori's house to watch a movie. Cassie's aunt and uncle, Allison and Frank Contreras, returned on September 24. When she hadn't heard from her daughter at the expected time and hadn't received a call, Cassie's mother went to their house soon after. Frank, Cassie's uncle, came out to meet her mother and wouldn't let her inside because Cassie's body had been found on the living room floor, with dried blood around it. The police were called and they advised not to touch anything. When the officers arrived, they took the body for examination and began their investigation. They discovered that the intruders had broken a window to enter through the basement, which was in disarray, and the electrical panel was open, raising further questions. There were 2 Dobermans locked in separate rooms. If they had been nearby, they would have prevented anyone from getting close to the girl. This raises the question of why Cassie locked them up, as a stranger would not have been able to do so. The autopsy showed that Cassie died from multiple stab wounds, 26 in total, with at least 9 being fatal. These wounds impacted her heart, lungs, and liver, leaving her with no chance of survival. It was determined that 2 different knives were used in the attack, suggesting the involvement of 2 assailants. There was no evidence of abuse assault, and her death occurred overnight between September 22 and 23. The first person questioned was Cassie's boyfriend, Matt. He explained that on the evening of September 22, he was at Cassie's house when Brian and Tori arrived. However, after an hour, they grew bored and left. On September 23, Matt attempted to contact Cassie by phone but received no response. He was unable to visit her house to check on her because he lacked transportation. His family had only 1 car, which his mother took to work. Matt found out about Cassie's murder on Sunday, September 24, when Cassie's mother called him to ask what he had done with her daughter. Matt thought that Brian and Tori treated Cassie well and might have even had feelings for her, as they sometimes flirted. During a detailed interrogation with Tori on September 24 at his home, where his parents were present, Tori stated that he and Brian had gone to a party with Cassie and Matt. However, since no one else showed up, they decided to leave her and Matt alone, and they went to the movie. When asked for more details, Tori could not recall any specifics about the movie they claimed to have watched, only mentioning that after the movie, he and Brian returned home. The following day, the police interviewed Brian with his mother present. Brian's version of events that evening closely matched Tori's. They left Cassie to go to the cinema, but like Tori, Brian couldn't recall the plot of the movie they supposedly watched 2 days earlier. He expressed distress upon hearing about Cassie's death and had trouble accepting that she was gone. When officers spoke with the cinema attendant, she confirmed that neither Tori nor Brian had actually been to the movie, as she recognized them and would have remembered their presence. This prompted the police to take a closer look at the friends. On September 25, the detective interviewed an anonymous individual at a high school, which revealed the following information. Tori and Brian had a strong fascination with knives, guns, and horror movies. They were so passionate about these films that they even wrote a screenplay centered around a murder. The witness reported that Cassie had asked her friends to film her for this project, and about 2 months prior, Tori had allowed Cassie to read the script. Tori expressed his enjoyment of movies like Scream and Friday the 13th, and he owned a collection of knives stored in his bedroom closet. Additionally, he had created a glove similar to the one seen in A Nightmare on Elm Street. The witness also noted that Tori bragged about being capable of committing the perfect crime, attributing this confidence to his extensive viewing of murder films and his habit of taking notes on evading capture. At school, Tori would often joke around by pretending to hit others and simulating throat-cutting gestures. On September 22, 2006, Tori had invited this witness to Cassie's party, but she declined. Furthermore, the police found out that Tori had been in love with Cassie for the past 2 to 3 years. On September 27, 2006, Brian and Tori were arrested and charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Although they were minors at the time, they were charged as adults. During the interrogation, Tori broke down in tears and confessed that Brian was responsible for the crime. In response, Brian accused Tori, claiming Brian was present at the scene but did not take part. He insisted that their intention was only to scare Cassie, not to kill her. However, Brian later admitted that he had struck Cassie at Tori's command. He also led investigators to the locations where they burned their costumes and buried the unburned items. The police excavated the area and discovered 2 masks, clothing, shoes, and knives. Tori and Brian had removed their socks and buried everything since the clothing and shoes were covered in blood. They had planned to change outfits beforehand. Most notably, the police found a videotape at the bottom of the pit that provided undeniable evidence of the crime. The 40-minute recording showed Tori and Brian painting masks they had bought from a store. Later in the video, they recorded a message to future serial killers, wishing them success and discussing their plans to target Cassie and her boyfriend, Matt. Fortunately, Matt's mother insisted he go home that day, which ultimately saved him. The tape also featured an interview that Tori conducted with Cassie and Matt on the afternoon of September 22, during which he indicated on screen that the two would soon be killed. Additionally, during a search of Tori's house, the police found a red notebook containing notes about planning a murder, as well as a list of 20 people that Brian and Tori intended to kill over the next 2 years, targeting one person each month. As investigators looked into the individuals on the list, they discovered that it included teachers, friends, girlfriends, and even a relative. The police were startled to uncover the connections these potential victims had with Tori and Brian, as most of these relationships appeared normal. Many people were shocked to learn that they were being targeted for murder. It's important to note that Tori and Brian did not fit the mold of typical victims of bullying or abuse. They seemed perfectly normal. Brian Draper was found guilty on April 17, 2007, and Tori Adamczyk was found guilty on June 8, 2007. On August 21, 2007, both received mandatory life sentences without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder, and an additional 30 years for conspiracy to commit murder. They began serving their sentences in a correctional facility in Idaho. The verdict upset the families of both Tori and Brian, who had hoped for leniency due to their young ages. Tori's relatives were especially outraged. In 2010, the attorneys for Brian and Tori filed separate appeals to the state Supreme Court, but both were denied. Tori's family continued to seek changes to his sentence for over a decade. Ultimately, in 2017, Tori Adamczyk lost the final court case that could have affected his sentence, ensuring that both Tori and Brian would spend the rest of their lives in prison. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Orville Fleming. Sarah June Douglas was born on August 4, 1987 in Sacramento, California, into a family with 5 siblings. As a child, she was a sweet, sociable, and cheerful girl with a deep love for nature. She had a particular fondness for animals, especially dogs and birds, and enjoyed spending time in the garden planting and caring for plants. However, her teenage years marked a dramatic change. Sarah became rebellious and mischievous, dropped out of school, abandoned her previous hobbies, and began spending most of her time with friends and attending parties. At the age of 19, she entered into a tumultuous relationship with a man and eventually became pregnant. In 2007, at the age of 20, Sarah gave birth to a son. Unfortunately, the child's birth did not resolve the conflicts between Sarah and her boyfriend, and they eventually decided to separate. Sarah had to adapt to life as a single mother with no formal education or career while taking care of her child. Over time, making ends meet became increasingly difficult, as finding a steady job that could support both her and her son proved to be a challenge. Although her mother and sister provided some support, Sarah continued to struggle financially. Eventually, she turned to providing intimate services on escort websites. Her sister described Sarah as a good person who made poor decisions, and this was one of the worst. While Sarah was able to alleviate her financial difficulties, this choice also exposed her to new and far more dangerous problems. After spending a few years working in the escort industry, Sarah met Orville Fleming, who provided financial stability and a secure home. Wanting to ensure a better future for her son, Sarah saw Orville as the salvation she had been hoping for. Orville Fleming, born on June 26, 1958 in California, had lived what appeared to be an exemplary life for over 30 years. He was a husband, father, and a dedicated firefighter with over 24 years of service. Due to his outstanding performance and leadership skills, Orville became a battalion chief. Orville also worked as an instructor at the fire academy. His career was flourishing, and his impeccable record qualified him for a substantial pension. Many considered Orville and Megan Fleming, his wife, who had been married for 30 years, to be the epitome of a successful, typical American couple. Together, they raised 2 children who had grown into responsible, successful adults. However, behind his seemingly perfect life, Orville was hiding a dark secret. A significant portion of his income was spent on one of his private indulgences, hiring escort services that he found on internet platforms. Despite being seen as a devoted husband and a dedicated civil servant in his 50s, Orville sought out intimate encounters with young women. On one of these websites, Orville met Sarah, a 24-year-old attractive young woman. Orville was immediately drawn to her during their first meeting. At the time, Sarah was using a different name on the website and charging $300 an hour for her services. It is said that during their meetings, Sarah gained Orville's trust by sharing stories about her difficult life as a single mother. Moved by her struggles, their relationship quickly developed. Orville became deeply infatuated with Sarah, to the point of obsession. Orville continued to care for Sarah and her son, but he felt that it was not enough. After some time, he suggested that they move in together, promising to leave his wife, marry Sarah, and take care of her child. True to his word, Orville divorced his first wife, Megan, and moved in with Sarah and her son in a house located in a quiet neighborhood in Fox River, south of Sacramento. Sarah shared with her family how happy she was with the changes in her life. Although her parents were initially concerned about the significant age gap between Sarah and Orville, They supported her and believed she had made the right choice. The new house also became a home for birds, as Sarah had loved them since childhood and could now devote her time to caring for them. She had quit her previous job to focus on taking care of Orville and her son. Their plans for marriage began when Orville gave Sarah an engagement ring with a large diamond. However, their relationship soon began to deteriorate. Orville became possessive and extremely jealous. Knowing that Sarah was financially dependent on him, he used this to his advantage to control her and ensure she stayed by his side. After living together for 2 years, Sarah grew increasingly frustrated with her fiancé, who displayed obsessive and controlling behavior. She also frequently clashed with Megan, who was still Orville's legal wife despite him filing for divorce on October 24. Sarah's patience was wearing thin, and she began calling Megan repeatedly, even demanding that Megan pay off Orville's debt for the escort services Sarah claimed to have provided him. As 2014 approached, Orville and Sarah's relationship had deteriorated significantly. Sarah began spending more time with her mother and sister, confiding in them that she was seriously considering ending her relationship with Orville. Little did she know that her decision to leave would lead to a devastating tragedy. On Wednesday, April 30, 2014, Sarah sent her son to stay with his father for a few days and decided to spend time with her mother and sister. The 3 women went to a casino where they stayed until 11 p.m. During this time, Orville repeatedly called and texted Sarah. Around midnight, Sarah's sister dropped her off at the house she shared with Orville, not realizing it would be the last time she would see her sister alive. When Sarah entered the house, she immediately sensed something was wrong. A strong smell of gas filled the air. She quickly turned off the gas in the kitchen and called her sister, telling her that Orville had left the gas on, possibly in an attempt to harm her birds. While they were talking, Sarah's sister suddenly heard her scream, apparently startled by someone entering the room. Moments later, her sister heard Orville's voice, followed by the sound of arguing and Sarah's terrified scream. Thinking it was just another one of their usual arguments, her sister went to bed, planning to check on Sarah the next morning. The next morning, Sarah's sister tried calling her several times but received no response. At 8 a.m., Sarah's sister and aunt decided to go to her house. They knocked on the door, but no one answered. Noticing that the door was unlocked, they cautiously entered the living room, only to find the house in disarray, with objects scattered everywhere. Feeling uneasy, they went to the master bedroom. What they found there horrified them so much that they ran out of the house in a panic. A neighbor, alarmed by the screams of Sarah's sister and aunt, quickly called 911 to report the incident. By 9 a.m., the police had arrived at the scene. Inside, they immediately noticed signs of a struggle. In the bedroom, they found a body lying face down on the floor next to the bed. The victim had visible stab wounds, and a cloth-like material was tied around her neck. The window shutters were closed, and no one else was in the house. The police quickly secured the area, called in forensic experts to collect evidence, and transported the young woman's body to the morgue. Sarah's sister and aunt were questioned and promptly identified the victim as Sarah June Douglas, 26. An autopsy revealed that Sarah had been attacked with a knife, possibly a kitchen knife. There were also clear signs of strangulation on her neck, along with bruises on her body, which indicated physical violence. Laboratory tests found no traces of alcohol or foreign substances in her system. Police learned from Sarah's sister that she lived with Orville and that their relationship had recently become strained. That night, Sarah had allegedly told Orville that she intended to end the relationship. Using details Sarah's sister overheard during a phone call, police began reconstructing the events that led to Sarah's tragic death. Orville Fleming became the prime suspect in Sarah's murder, leading to an arrest warrant being issued against him. However, Orville disappeared, and efforts to locate him were unsuccessful. A statewide search was conducted, and his official vehicle was found not far from his home, but his whereabouts remained a mystery. During the investigation, police discovered that Orville was in possession of 2 handguns that were missing from the scene. As a result, they warned the public that he was considered armed and extremely dangerous. Flyers were widely distributed, urging people to report any suspicious individuals. The police search continued for several days, with special units involved. Meanwhile, at the house where Sarah had died, relatives, friends, and acquaintances gathered to pay their respects and offer condolences to her family. The media closely followed the search and provided regular updates. On May 2, the police decided to reenact the events of that tragic night. Orville's relatives and colleagues were invited to participate, and those who knew him were shocked by his alleged involvement in such a terrible crime. They had always known him to be a kind, positive, and cheerful person, which made the accusations even harder to believe. A week after Orville disappeared, he was removed from his post due to being absent from work for more than 5 days. Meanwhile, the police redirected their search to remote areas of California where Orville might have traveled. They speculated that, as a nature enthusiast who frequently hiked in hard-to-reach areas, Orville might possess survival skills suited to such environments. During the ongoing search, Orville's wife Megan made a startling revelation. She claimed that Orville and other members of the California Fire Department had used escort services at the fire station. Megan stated that she had seen a video showing firefighters with women, including one identified as Sarah, inside the station's fire truck. However, when police searched the home Orville and Sarah shared, they found no such videos or photos. Megan went on to report that Sarah had been demanding money from her for the past 4 years to pay debts related to intimate services. Megan claimed that the situation escalated after Sarah discovered that the diamond ring Orville had given her was, in fact, a fake. After 2 weeks of intensive searching, Orville, a former fire battalion commander, was finally arrested on May 26, 2014. He was found at a bus stop near the woods where he had abandoned his car, suggesting that he had been hiding in the woods the entire time. When he attempted to catch a bus to get food, he was arrested without resistance. On May 20, 2014, Orville Fleming appeared in court. He claimed that he could not afford a lawyer and refused to plead guilty. 10 days later, the California Highway Patrol announced an investigation into alleged misconduct involving members of the fire department where Orville had worked. In October 2014, 4 months after the murder, Orville formally pleaded not guilty. Sarah's family, particularly her mother, was outraged by Orville's arrogance, as he even winked at his lawyer while proclaiming his innocence. Her family informed the court about Sarah's troubled relationship with Orville, describing him as a jealous and controlling husband who had forbidden her from working. At the same time, an investigation was launched into the fire academy where Orville had been an instructor. On December 29, 2014, evidence of misconduct was uncovered, resulting in the suspension of 16 firefighters. In June 2015, Orville's lawyers began their defense by attempting to portray him in the best possible light. They argued that he was a victim of manipulation by an escort service employee with a history of substance abuse. The defense claimed that the woman had exploited Orville for her own benefit until he reached his breaking point. They also asserted that he had amnesia and could not recall the attack itself. Through this narrative, the defense hoped to secure a reduced sentence. The next day, Orville alleged that Sarah was an alcoholic, used illegal drugs, and frequently yelled at and humiliated him. On the night of the incident, he claimed they had a heated argument, after which he lost control. He stated that he went into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, returned to the room, pinned Sarah down on the bed, and stabbed and strangled her. Orville claimed he could not remember all the details of the incident and later expressed shock, saying he could not believe he had killed the woman he intended to marry. He also revealed that while on the run, he had attempted end life 3 times. Finally, the prosecutor presented their case. During questioning, Orville claimed he did not remember what had happened. However, the police had a recording from his arrest in which Orville clearly confessed that he had stabbed Sarah because she insulted him. The prosecution argued that Orville had sufficient time to comprehend his actions, making him eligible for first-degree murder charges. On June 24, 2015, Orville Fleming was convicted of second-degree murder. On July 31, he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 16 years. Orville's crime not only deprived Sarah's 5-year-old son of the chance to grow up with his mother, but also exposed him to a media frenzy due to speculation about his mother's past. To shield the boy from public scrutiny and hostility, his father relocated him to Santa Rosa. Sarah's family suffered two devastating tragedies. First, Sarah's death shattered their hearts. Then, just months after Sarah's death, her brother, to whom she was very close, took his own life, unable to cope with the immense pain of losing her in such horrific circumstances. For Sarah's family, her death at the hands of a man she had been with for years was a stark warning to end abusive relationships before it was too late. It also highlighted that seemingly respectable and socially respected people can sometimes be far worse than those who are shunned. Hello everyone. Today we will learn about another case, the case of Susan Bailey. Susan was born in 1965 in a small town in Minnesota, USA. She was an ordinary, carefree girl who easily made friends and was sociable. Partly due to having many siblings, her parents had 4 children in total. Susan was smart, did well in school, and was responsible and non-confrontational. From a young age, her parents taught her the importance of independence and hard work. After graduating from high school, Susan enrolled in a local college. To avoid burdening her parents financially while paying for her education, she took a job as a saleswoman. It seemed like everything was falling into place for her. However, she never enjoyed the cold and gray weather of Minnesota and dreamed of moving south. After completing her studies, she decided to relocate to another state. This decision led Susan to the sunny beaches of California, fulfilling her childhood dream. There, she quickly found a job in retail and met a man, Mr. Bailey, who would become her husband. He was calm and reserved, pursuing a military career. They married in 1988. Although Susan's family disapproved of her choice due to the challenges of Mr. Bailey's profession, they ultimately accepted her decision. In the following years, they moved several times because of her husband's military service. While he worked, Susan spent most of her time at home and felt unhappy with this lifestyle. However, he promised to leave the military after his contract ended, which he did in 1990. They then returned to California, and Susan decided to becoming pregnant with their first child, a girl named Jennifer. 4 years later, they welcomed another child. They chose to focus on their careers to support their growing family. During this time, Susan found success in her retail career and became the primary breadwinner, while her husband struggled in his job. They switched roles, with him taking on the role of a stay-at-home dad, and Susan working to provide for the family. This change was made possible when Susan accepted a job with a new clothing company. In 1997, she was promoted to regional manager of Texas, which came with significant responsibilities. Susan realized she couldn't turn down this opportunity. She and the children relocated to Texas, where they decided to settle in a small town called Denton. In 2000, the Bailey family purchased a house with 4 bedrooms, a living room, and a separate playroom in the small town. It seemed like a perfect place for a peaceful family life. As Susan became part of the local community, she met her neighbors. They had children of school age and lived across the street. They spent a lot of time together, discussing local news. However, Susan later discovered something troubling. Whenever Jennifer visited the neighbor, she would leave with items in her hands. After these visits, the neighboring family noticed that money and belongings were missing, leading them to suspect that Jennifer was stealing. Despite this, her neighbor never brought up her concerns with Susan. possibly thinking that Susan was too busy with work and did not want to burden her with additional problems. As a result, the relationship with the neighbors became strained. Susan's son David faced several challenges. He struggled with bedwetting, which required her to change the bedding nearly every day, causing her stress. Additionally, David had behavioral issues and frequently got into trouble. However, these problems were minor compared to the bankruptcy of Susan's company, which led to her losing her job and significant income, severely impacting their family. At that time, she had started her own small cosmetic shop, but it did not compensate for the loss of her managerial position in a large firm. Eventually, she found work at another clothing store, but her new salary was much lower than her previous earnings. During this period, Susan realized her independence, while her husband struggled to find a job to support her. Their relationship became strained, and by 2006, they officially divorced. It remains unclear why her husband did not take any initiative to fight for custody of their children or their assets. He simply left everything to Susan without hesitation and agreed to pay child support. Susan was struggling with her own problems as well as those of her son and daughter, and everything seemed to be getting worse. For the first time, she felt overwhelmed by her new responsibilities. At the same time, she had to work 2 jobs to keep the family financially stable and avoid debt. This left her with little time to spend with her children. Susan was hardly ever home, and the children felt neglected. David was falling behind in school, skipping classes, and even resorting to self-harm in an attempt to get his mother's attention. His sister Jennifer took care of him, but she felt uncomfortable in that role and wanted to enjoy her own life instead. She often expressed her frustration about this. During this time, Jennifer met a boy named Paul Henson, who was a year younger than her. He lived with his family in a trailer park. Paul mentioned that he came from a troubled family, which resonated with Jennifer as she could relate to his struggles. However, Paul was quite unusual. He believed he had 2 distinct personalities. He described one of his 2 personalities as a reincarnation of a 10th century executioner, referring to it as his evil alter ego. Many of his classmates noticed Paul talking to himself, conversing with imaginary people and speaking in languages no one understood. He spent most of his free time playing fantasy computer games. Despite his unusual behavior, Paul genuinely liked Jennifer, and they started dating. Jennifer thought his eccentricities were just a product of his vivid imagination and gradually began to share his interests, playing the same games and acting oddly. For instance, they wore dog collars with each other's names. They also engaged in dark mystical practices, which eventually led to a love triangle. Paul revealed to Jennifer that one of his personalities was fond of her, while another personality of his had feelings for a girl named Marilee. Marilee was a 14-year-old from a wealthy family who appeared naive and impressionable. Marilee and Jennifer both fell under his influence, believing they all had mutual feelings for each other, leading to a complicated emotional situation. Susan Bailey strongly disliked Paul from the start and encouraged her daughter to end her relationship with the unusual Paul. However, Jennifer refused to heed her family's warnings. As a result, both their relationship and the home environment worsened quickly. Despite being told not to communicate with Paul, Jennifer was seen with him during the day when all the adults were home. Additionally, Jennifer regularly ignored her mother's requests regarding her schoolwork, chores, and taking care of David. Jennifer got a job at a fast food restaurant, which meant she was hardly ever home. This worried Susan, as David was often left unsupervised. To help, Susan's parents agreed to take David in for the month of July. During this time, they noticed an improvement in his behavior. They taught him household chores and introduced him to activities like fishing. However, they also observed some concerning behavior when David threw a tantrum in the car after his grandparents refused to buy him something on a whim. He rocked the car back and forth in frustration but calmed down as soon as they got home. This incident made his grandmother realize that David was struggling with emotional issues. Determined to help David, his grandparents began taking him to various doctors and clinics. His grandmother wanted him to stay longer so they could address his problems, but Susan was reluctant to let him stay for too long. Eventually, she bought a ticket and insisted that David return home. When he did, he surprised his mother and sister with his good behavior, and even brought Jennifer a small gift. At this point, Susan had been considering buying a car for Jennifer to make her commute to work easier, but Susan realized she didn't have enough money. Jennifer was unhappy about this and insisted she needed a car for convenience. Her mother asked her to be patient. A month later, Susan was shocked to receive a bill for the children's phone services that totaled $1,500. She found out that Jennifer had been spending all her free time talking to Paul, while David was frequently online, which led to high charges. Susan explained to her children that this was unacceptable and urged them to reduce their phone usage. Shortly after, Susan received a notification that Jennifer had spent an additional $200 on phone calls. Furious and already facing financial difficulties, Susan confronted Jennifer, who claimed that her paycheck had been delayed and that she intended to cover the costs herself. At that point, Susan decided to contact the restaurant where Jennifer worked to inquire about the delay in her daughter's pay. For the past month and a half, Jennifer had not shown up for work, so there was no paycheck for her. This shocked Susan, who realized that Jennifer had been dishonest. Instead of working, she had been spending time with her boyfriend. The next day, Susan at work, leaving David home alone, wandering around the courtyard of the house without clothes, which scared the neighbors. At that moment, Susan understood that she had lost control over her children and felt powerless to change things. To support the family, she had to work all the time. By the end of September, the situation had worsened. Jennifer decided to take advantage of her mother's constant work schedule. She started inviting Paul and Marilee over to the guest room, where her father used to live, spending time with them while Susan was away. When Susan was home, they acted like good guests, but as soon as she left, they behaved rudely. David was aware of everything but kept it a secret from Susan, supporting his sister and her friends. Eventually, they all grew tired of their parents' restrictions on their lives. This frustration led to a dangerous plan to kill Jennifer's mothers and Marilee's mothers, as well as Paul's parents. The trio became involved in various criminal ideas, including poisoning Susan with crushed prescription pills or arranging for her to be electrocuted in the bath. They also considered using a baseball bat, knives to cause serious injury. Paul even thought about shooting his father and stepmother, while Marilee planned to stab her mother while she slept. In the final phase of their plan, the teenagers intended to steal Susan's car, take their parents' money, and escape to Canada. On September 22, 2008, 14-year-old Marilee White had been missing for several days and had not answered her phone. Concerned, her mother reported her daughter as missing. Marilee's friends were also unable to contact her. Marilee's mother took action by distributing flyers with Marilee's photo and contacting the police. Fortunately, a patrol found Marilee wandering aimlessly on the outskirts of town and brought her home. During this time, Marilee revealed that Paul, a friend, had abandoned her. The police persuaded her not to run away again, and it appeared that she had calmed down. However, on the morning of September 23, 2008, Marilee's mother woke up feeling a strange presence. When she opened her eyes, she saw Marilee standing over her bed with a large kitchen knife. Instead of attacking, she reacted defensively as Marilee demanded the car keys to drive to the Bailey family's house. Marilee planned to gather others and escape to Canada. Although she reluctantly gave her the keys, she prevented Marilee from leaving. As soon as Marilee stepped outside, she called the police. Authorities intercepted Marilee and took her to a juvenile detention center. There, Marilee told her cellmate about a plan to kill their parents, but nobody took her seriously. At this time, Paul Henson waited for his father and stepmother to leave their trailer in the morning to go shopping. He broke into his father's room and took his .22 caliber handgun. He intended to shoot them when they returned, but they unexpectedly stopped at a movie theater and then went to visit friends, which delayed him return. Frustrated by the wait, Paul decided to leave and went back to Susan's house. That evening, Marilee was released from custody, and at the same time, Paul's parents reported him missing. The next day, September 24, David took a large knife with him to school. When the school administration learned about it, they issued a written warning to his mother. Susan put the warning on the refrigerator, but was too busy to address it right away. The following day, a police officer approached her to inform her about the search for Paul Henson, suggesting he might be at their house. Although she couldn't find him there, she noticed clear signs that he had been visiting frequently. The detective asked for permission to enter the house and talk to Jennifer, and she agreed. From the beginning, Jennifer seemed nervous. The detective knew about the teenager's deceptive plan and decided to ask Jennifer where Paul was. She said she hadn't seen her boyfriend since Saturday. The detective then requested to speak with her alone, but her mother, Susan, refused. Suspecting that Paul might be hiding in the house, the detective asked to search the premises, but Susan denied the request, stating that a warrant was needed. As a result, the detective left without any new information. The search for Paul continued, and another police officer arrived at the Bailey home. This time, Susan was informed that there were reports suggesting Paul might have a missing .22 caliber pistol from his father's trailer. Worried about safety, she reluctantly allowed the search, although she was not happy about it. During the search, they found several suspicious items, including a large butcher knife, hidden under a couch cushion in the living room. Since the knife did not belong to the Baileys, Susan accused Jennifer of planning to run away with Paul again. Jennifer explained that her friend might have accidentally left his knife at her house during his last visit, but this explanation did not convince Susan. Without waiting for the police to leave, Susan started arguing with her daughter again. Susan threatened to send her to live with her father or grandparents. During a search of Jennifer's room, they found evidence that she was packing her belongings. They also discovered several knives, which raised suspicions. However, since they couldn't find Paul's gun, the police left the house. Later, the mother found a box of ammunition hidden in one of the suitcases and became worried. She called the police again, requesting a more thorough search of her home. When they returned, the police took the ammunition but still did not find a gun. Instead, they found even more knives scattered around the house. In the trash, they found an empty bottle of antidepressants that belonged to Marilee. The Bailey family did not use such medications, but the police were unaware of this girl at the time and overlooked these concerning signs. Paul's father arrived at the house anxious about his son. He packed up Paul's belongings and left with everyone else. The following day, Susan struggled to find a way to resolve issues with her children, but nothing seemed to work. On September 25, she went to her regular job, followed by her second job, finally finishing around midnight. Throughout the day, Susan tried to contact her children, but both ignored her calls and messages. When she got home, she immediately sensed that something was off. The lights were off. Inside, she discovered the usual chaos left by her children. As she moved upstairs in the darkness, the house felt eerily quiet. As Susan climbed the stairs, someone suddenly grabbed her by the neck and covered her mouth with a cloth that had a chemical smell. Just then, Jennifer, Paul, and David stepped out of the shadows. They quickly slit Susan's throat and began stabbing her repeatedly with knives until she lay motionless on the floor within minutes. However, This horrific act was only part of their sinister plan. On September 26, Susan's mother received multiple calls from worried colleagues about Susan, as she had not shown up for her shifts that morning, a surprising behavior for someone who was known to be a workaholic. Susan's mother made several attempts to contact Susan, but was unsuccessful. Eventually, she reached out to the police department in Roanoke, Texas, asking them to check on the Bailey family's home. Over the next 2 days, patrol officers visited the house multiple times, but found no evidence that anyone was there. The lights were off, no cars were in the driveway, and all the doors and windows were closed. There were no signs of distress. It appeared as if the family had gone on vacation. Despite this, Susan's mother was deeply concerned that something might have gone wrong and urged the police to continue investigating. At 3:30 a.m. on September 28, 2008, a police officer in South Dakota spotted a suspicious vehicle parked near a closed gas station. He stopped to observe and noticed a teenager got out without turning on the headlights, did something briefly, then returned to the vehicle, and they all drove away. The officer decided to follow them. He saw that the car had Texas license plates, indicating they had traveled a long distance. However, it was unusual for teenagers to be out so late alone, making the situation seem very odd. The police officer pulled over the car and noticed a teenager driving. In the passenger seat was another minor, a girl, and in the back seat was a younger boy with a large dog. The car was stopped, and they were asked for identification, but none of them had any. The driver was 16-year-old Paul Henson. When the police officer checked his information, he discovered that Paul had been reported as a runaway and was also a suspect in a firearms case. The car belonged to Susan Bailey. Backup was requested, and they searched the stolen vehicle, but no gun was found. Jennifer's statements were inconsistent from the beginning. She appeared frightened and exhausted. Meanwhile, Texas police were alerted that the missing persons had been located. When Texas detectives heard this, they realized that Susan would never have allowed her children to travel that far without her. They suspected that something had happened to her and decided it was time to thoroughly investigate the Bailey home, especially after numerous requests from Susan's parents and colleagues. Upon entering the house, the detectives were immediately hit by a strong smell of decomposition. On the first floor, they found only a plate of pudding that had fallen on the floor. Forensic analysis later revealed that the pudding was laced with drugs. On the second floor, at the top of the stairs, they discovered Susan lying face down, blood everywhere. She had suffered 26 stab wounds and had been brutally beaten with a blunt object. The bathtub was filled with water, and an electric cord with exposed wires was hanging from the curtain plugged in. It appeared that someone had meticulously planned multiple methods to murder her. The smell of decomposition mixed with the smell of toiletries. A receipt found in the house confirmed that 13-year-old David had purchased these cleaning supplies at a local Walmart at the indicated time. In Jennifer's room, investigators found a diary in which she detailed plans for committing murder and starting a new life with Paul in Canada. They also uncovered additional evidence, including freshly cut hair belonging to Paul, clothing stained with Susan's blood, and DNA traces from Jennifer and David. It was clear that the teenagers had not effectively cleaned up the murder scene. The 3 suspects were detained in Texas, while a dog associated with them was taken to a shelter. The juvenile offenders quickly began to speak. Paul Henson accused David of the murder, claiming they all fled their town to protect the boy from the authorities. When detectives questioned David, he admitted to killing his mother and laughed. The detectives were taken aback. They did not expect such a response from a 13-year-old. Jennifer placed all the blame on Paul, insisting that she and her brother had done nothing wrong. The only person who avoided severe punishment was Marilee White, who was not in the car and had no evidence linking her to Susan's murder. However, she remained under police scrutiny for a long time, and was questioned multiple times. Eventually, Marilee confirmed her friend's boyfriend's claims that they had planned to kill their families. She shared many details about their relationships. According to Marilee, Paul, Jennifer, and she had become very close. Paul enjoyed being intimate with both girls simultaneously, arguing that since he was dating Jennifer and had a separate relationship with Marilee, it wasn't cheating. The group engaged in occult practices, including cutting themselves and drinking each other's blood. Jennifer's plan was to kill all their parents, escape to Canada, and start their own commune. Because of her cooperation with the police, no charges were filed against Marilee. She was compelled to testify at the trial against the other conspirators. Based on her testimony, the prosecution believed that Jennifer ambushed her mother in a hallway on the second floor and attacked her with a bat, while Paul Henson came from behind and cut her throat. David also took part in the crime and inflicted superficial stab wounds on her body. Jennifer and Paul, despite being minors, were tried as adults for murder and each received a 60-year prison sentence. They will be eligible for parole starting in 2038. David was also tried as an adult for his involvement in the crime and was convicted of complicity, receiving a 26-year sentence. He will be eligible for release in 2034 when he turns 40. Following these events, Marilee White moved to a different state with her mother and changed her name. Her photo is kept confidential to protect her safety, as she was a young witness. Hello everyone. Today we will learn about another case. The case of Mary Catherine Edwards. Before the advent of modern DNA research techniques, building a criminal database was challenging, making the investigation and tracing of crimes less effective. However, recent technological advances have led to the development of sophisticated tools that can help identify criminals who have been on the run for years. Now, no one can evade justice. On January 14, 1995, the Edwards family had a planned gathering. Saturday dinners together were a cherished tradition for the parents and their two daughters. So, when one of the twin sisters, Mary, was missing, it raised immediate concerns. Mary Catherine, 31, did not attend the dinner and did not answer calls from her family members, who were trying to reach her from the restaurant. Frustrated, they decided to go to Mary's home in Beaumont, Texas, where she was living at the time. When Mary's mother arrived at the house, she became worried upon finding the door unlocked. Inside, they heard running water but received no response to their calls. The bathroom was flooded, and Mary was discovered unresponsive in distressing conditions. Her sister, Allison, immediately called the police to report that she had found Mary's lifeless body. The sisters were twins, raised in Texas, and were the only children in the Edwards family. The loss of one was a devastating shock. They had always been inseparable, kind-hearted, and dedicated to helping others, especially children. After graduating high school, both sisters pursued careers as teachers and worked at the same school. They were so similar that students and faculty often confused them. At the time of her death, Mary was 31 years old and thriving in her career. Known for her bright personality, her murder sparked widespread outrage and anger. Mary was cherished by her students, many of whom felt a close bond with her. Hundreds of children, relatives, and friends attended her funeral, with many students mourning the loss of a woman who had been a vital source of support in their challenging lives. Some were in tears upon hearing the news of her passing. Parents urged detectives to take action against the criminal responsible for the brutal death of Mary. The community was horrified by the circumstances surrounding her death. Mary was found handcuffed in the bathroom, indicating that she had been abused. The bathtub was filled with blood, showing that she had fought back against her attacker, as evidenced by defensive wounds on her hands and body. Traces of the assault suggested that it occurred in her bedroom, where evidence was found on the bedding. Investigators suspected that Mary might have known her attacker, as there were no signs of forced entry into her home. The townspeople, who knew Mary well, cooperated with detectives, eager to identify the person responsible for such a horrific crime. Given the brutality and circumstances, detectives focused their investigation on her close acquaintances, believing there could be a personal motive. It was initially thought that Mary might have drowned, but an autopsy revealed that her lungs did not contain enough water, suggesting that water only entered her lungs after she had died. The true cause of death was asphyxiation, as indicated by distinct marks on her neck, and injuries suggesting she had been tightly restrained with great force until she could no longer resist. Forensic experts meticulously reconstructed the crime scene by examining the victim's house, starting with the bathroom and then moving to the bedroom. They collected a significant amount of evidence. The most alarming item found was the Smith & Wesson handcuffs that the victim had been restrained with, which resembled those used by police. This discovery left law enforcement officials confused, raising suspicions about whether someone connected to the police or a security worker might have had a personal relationship with the victim. The emotional impact of the case was deeply felt by everyone involved. In the weeks following the crime, detectives attempted to trace the serial number of the handcuffs, but their efforts were unsuccessful. By this time, the primary suspect had shifted to David Perry, the ex-boyfriend of Mary. Even though Mary was attractive and sociable, she maintained a small circle of close friends and had a few ex-lovers. She dedicated most of her time to her work and her students, leaving little room for a personal life. It was discovered that David Perry was the only person who might have had keys to her house. This raised concerns that he could have been stalking her and visiting her home out of jealousy or revenge. David agreed to cooperate with the police and provide everything needed for the examination. While waiting for the results, detectives interviewed mutual acquaintances of the couple, and everyone described David as a completely harmless person, showing no signs of aggression. He had no prior criminal record, history of violent or abuse offenses. Additionally, David Perry presented solid evidence of his alibi. He was not even in town on the night of the murder, as confirmed by multiple witnesses. David fully cooperated with the investigation, voluntarily provided DNA samples, and did not exhibit any characteristics of a criminal. Forensic analysis confirmed that the DNA did not match, leading to his removal from the list of suspects. Unfortunately, that was where the investigation stalled. Others in the victim's close circle also did not fit the criminal profile and had solid alibis. Although investigators had a lot of materials for analysis, the forensic technology at the time was insufficient to make further progress. The unsuccessful search continued for years. The situation changed significantly 23 years later, in 2018, with the introduction of a DNA analysis method that utilized genealogy. This method allowed investigators to find potential matches by examining relatives of the suspected. Law enforcement turned to the GEDmatch program, which collects DNA from Americans who voluntarily submit their samples, creating a large database. This database was instrumental in solving long-standing unsolved cases. When Detective Brandon Bess was advised to revisit the old cases, he immediately recalled the unsolved murder of Mary Edwards, which had troubled him for years. In April 2020, DNA samples from the scene related to Mary were sent to a lab at Othram for analysis. Here, many matches were found with the relatives of the killer. This marked the beginning of building a family tree related to the suspect. The number of names that needed analysis was overwhelming, totaling several thousand individuals. At this point, the detective's wife, who had a keen interest in genealogy, decided to assist with the investigation. She dedicated her free time to carefully examining matches from this extensive list. This task required precision, as each name needed to be evaluated accurately to ensure their efforts were worthwhile. Additionally, the investigators reviewed the diaries of Mary. It was believed that the victim may have had an obsessive admirer who harmed her out of unrequited love. Despite a thorough examination of the diary entries following the crime, no significant leads were uncovered. They then chose to cross-reference the names mentioned in the diaries with those in the genealogical records. During this process, the surname Lapointe began to come to light. The first identified relative of the murderer was Shara Lapointe. When contacted, Shara revealed that she is a well-known expert in genealogy and genetics. With decades of experience in her field, Shara had previously worked on challenging cases. Notably, she successfully identified one of the women buried along a state highway in the infamous Texas Fields of Death. Now, she was eager to apply her expertise to help solve other crimes, including the mystery surrounding Mary Edwards's death. She was prepared to assist with the investigation, even though it meant examining her own family members, which could lead to unsettling discoveries. As she began her analysis, she felt a sense of dread while checking the backgrounds of her own siblings, aware that the results might have serious implications. She needed to review about 7,500 names. Each individual on this list was examined slowly, requiring her to gather and process information about them and their relatives before either adding them to the family tree or discarding them. This process took several hours for each person. Over 3 months, detectives and Shara Lapointe devoted all their free time to searching for the criminal. Eventually, they found a promising lead, a couple living in Beaumont who matched the profile of the murderer's family. They have 2 sons who attended Forest Park High School, the same school Mary attended as a child. This led to 2 main suspects, Michael Foreman and Clayton Foreman. Michael did not match the age profile for the time of the crime. After checking, he was found to have no criminal record or history of aggressive behavior, so he was quickly ruled out as a suspect. Clayton's situation was different. He had known Mary Edwards from high school and was closer in age to her. Furthermore, he had a criminal record for abuse, making him a strong suspect. In 1981, a 19-year-old girl reported to the police that Clayton Foreman had tied her hands and abused her. The details of that crime were strikingly similar to the incident involving Mary that occurred nearly 15 years later, with the key difference being that the first victim survived. She had also attended Forest Park High School, while Clayton was a manager at that time. The incident was effectively concealed, leading to Clayton receiving a suspended sentence and a fine. At that time, there were no police databases containing DNA samples, and he was not required to provide any. This lack of evidence is why Clayton was not identified during the investigation into the death of Diana Coe, his girlfriend of 3 years, with whom he had been planning to marry. Although Diana described him as a nice guy, it seems she did not truly know him. Less than 3 months before their wedding, she discovered the details of his abuse charge, the suspended sentence, and the fine, prompting her to want to end their engagement. However, Clayton, a manipulative liar, convinced her that it was all a misunderstanding. He avoided discussing the issue but created a believable narrative. Diana, eager to believe him, prioritized her relationship over her safety, which turned out to be a mistake. They went ahead with the marriage despite warnings from her family. When Diana and Clayton were married for just over 11 years, Diana claimed that Clayton frequently lied about his significant financial issues. She also observed that he had an unusual obsession with police handcuffs and law enforcement tools, even hanging a pair of handcuffs from the rearview mirror of his car. By the time Mary was killed, Diana had already divorced Clayton. She recalled calling him in tears to share the news, but she was taken aback by his indifferent response. He continued the conversation as if nothing had happened and then hung up. It became evident that he was likely not overly concerned about the situation. He was probably connected to the events that had transpired. The suspect was now 60 years old and no longer lived in Beaumont. He had been located in a small town called Reynoldsburg, Ohio, which had a population of a few thousand. At that time, Clayton was working as a driver. Investigators were able to find his address and all necessary information. Now they needed to collect his DNA for analysis. They set up surveillance on the suspect's house. A local police officer even took his trash, which was sent to a forensic lab. DNA from Clayton was discovered on a beer bottle found in the garbage. The match was nearly 100%. A significant finding indicated that the investigation was nearly complete after all these years. The next step was to confront the suspect. The detectives in charge of the case traveled to Ohio and devised a plan to lure Clayton into a trap. Since he was a driver, they decided to approach him about a fictitious lost item that a client was supposedly searching for. On April 29, 2021, Clayton was summoned to the police precinct under the pretense of discussing a lost wallet. He agreed to come in voluntarily. For the first time in 26 years since a brutal murder, the suspected perpetrator was in the interrogation room. The detectives informed him about the murder of Mary Edwards. This news shocked him, but Clayton attempted to maintain his composure and initially denied knowing her. The detectives then showed him a wedding photo of his first wife, which included Mary and her twin sister as bridesmaids. This reminded him that Mary had indeed attended his wedding, as his wife had invited her. From the beginning, Clayton became visibly nervous as the detectives bombarded him with questions, revealing inconsistencies in his story. The detectives focused on his vulnerabilities, hoping to obtain a confession. Clayton insisted that he was unaware of Mary's death and claimed he had never been to her house. However, these statements were quickly refuted by his ex-wife. Despite the evidence, Clayton continued to deny any connection to Mary, which seemed to be a defensive reaction. He also denied having had intimate relations with her, but this was proven false when DNA samples matching his were found on her body. The realization that his DNA was discovered on her underwear and body left him bewildered. When he was arrested for the murder of Mary Edwards, he insisted on having a lawyer and stopped cooperating with the investigators. In a symbolic gesture of victory in this long-standing case, Clayton Foreman was handcuffed with the same type of cuffs that had been found on Mary. On March 12, 2024, over 29 years after the murder of Mary, Beaumont prosecutor Patrick Knauth and colleagues Mike Laird, Sonny Eckhart are ready to go to trial. The absence of a lawyer limited his options. Weak attempts to invoke the statute of limitations were unsuccessful. Clayton Foreman remained obstinately silent, neither confessing to the murder nor defending himself in court. For everyone involved in the investigation, emotions ran high. Cheryl LaPointe worried that the Clayton's family would resent her for participating in Clayton's arrest. Nevertheless, she received support, with others expressing concern for her safety leading up to the court hearings. Shara felt it was her duty to uncover the truth behind the cold-blooded murder, regardless of the personal costs. One of the key witnesses for the prosecution was the twin sister of Mary, Allison, who emotionally recounted how Clayton took away the person she loved most. Even after many years, she still bore a striking resemblance to her sister. During the trial, the prosecution brought in experts in genealogy and genetics, along with forensic laboratory specialists, to explain advanced DNA analysis techniques to the jurors. It was crucial to demonstrate that relative matching methods were reliable. The prosecution also focused on women who had been impacted by Clayton's actions. One of his former colleagues testified, sharing her observations of Clayton's unusual interest in police items at work. As his subordinate who handled documents, she often opened his desk drawer and found a pair of handcuffs. Although she found this odd, she didn't feel comfortable asking him about it, thinking it was just one of his quirks. The defendant's last wife shared how she discovered many dress-revealingly photos of underage girls. When she confronted Clayton about them, he responded calmly, saying he needed them to fantasize about taking away their innocence. He then laughed, dismissing it as a failed joke. Despite these disturbing revelations, Clayton continued to evade justice. One of his victims, Diana Coe, also attended the trial. She believed in his guilt and testified for the prosecution. It was during this time that she learned about another victim and realized the full extent of her ex-husband's cruelty. However, She pointed out that during their 11 years of marriage, he did not display such behaviors during their intimate moments and never crossed reasonable boundaries in their relationship. The first victim of Clayton's assault provided a detailed testimony about her experience. At the time, she was 19 years old and just months away from his wedding to Diana. One night, while driving home along a dirt road, her car got stuck. Suddenly, a civilian car pulled up, and a man claiming to be a police officer got out to offer her help. Feeling helpless, she accepted his assistance. However, as she stepped out of her car, he attacked her, tied her hands behind her back, and threatened her with a knife, saying he would slit her throat if she resisted. Clayton abused her. Surprisingly, afterward, he became more gentle, even driving her home. During the ride, he asked her not to cry, tried to comfort her, and expressed remorse for what had happened, claiming he didn't want to hurt her. This sudden shift in his demeanor was unsettling, especially considering the violent behavior he had just exhibited. At that time, she reported the incident to the police, but she was fearful. In court, she mentioned that she had forgiven her attacker and harbored no resentment towards him. She did not wish to harm Clayton. She believed he truly regretted his actions and would not reoffend. This perspective contributed to the light punishment he received. Now the first victim feels guilty, thinking that if Clayton had been imprisoned, it might have prevented the murder of Mary. Additionally, another victim testified against the defendant in court. Previously, she had been too afraid to contact law enforcement. This woman was also a friend of Diana, with whom she had stayed in touch during school. According to her testimony, Clayton attacked her one evening in 2006 while she was living alone in her apartment. Their past friendship allowed her to communicate with him, and he initially appeared to be an ordinary guy until his darker side emerged. One evening, Clayton visited her apartment and revealed that he was struggling financially and having marital issues. He was convincing, expressing a need for someone to understand and listen to him without judgment. Feeling sympathetic, she let him in. However, once she turned her back, he attacked her, held a gun to her head, threatened her, and assaulted her. He also used handcuffs during the attack. After it was over, Clayton surprisingly softened, apologized, and asked her not to report the incident to the police. She was scared, so she did not file charges against him. Following that night, Clayton did not reach out to her at all. It's important to note that his assaults were strikingly similar to a situation that could have occurred with Mary Edwards. Unlike previous victims, however, Mary fought back against his attack. The prosecution's witnesses testified for 7 days, while the defense presented no evidence. The defense attorney claimed that although Clayton might be an abuser, there was no proof that he was also a murderer. The defense suggested that Clayton's limited options might have influenced the situation. They acknowledged incidents involving other women, stating that Clayton typically did not act aggressively towards his wives, except for his fetish involving handcuffs. After hearing the prosecution's arguments, the jurors went to deliberate. They found Clayton Foreman guilty of murdering Mary Catherine Edwards. He received a life sentence. Clayton is eligible for parole in 2061. By then, he will be 101 years old. The jurors stated that it was not merely the testimonies from the traumatized women that led to their decision. Rather, it was the forensic experts' analysis of DNA evidence showing a nearly 100% match with Clayton Foreman's DNA that confirmed their conviction. The experts provided such a thorough explanation of the principles of modern forensic methodologies that it was difficult to find more convincing words. The convict also refused to admit his guilt until the end, even in the face of evidence regarding the abuse. Naturally, against this background, he never revealed the details of his heinous crime. Nevertheless, there remained even more horrifying questions. For many years, Clayton managed to skillfully hide his malicious nature from everyone around him, even from the women he lived closely with. Most people around him had no idea that he was capable of murder. Authorities suspected that he might have been involved in a significantly larger number of bloody crimes that remained unsolved. Clayton Foreman is in state prison. He will be eligible for parole in 2061, of course, if he lives that long. He continues to keep silent, while authorities do not lose hope that he will eventually reveal his secrets. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom. Christopher Newsom was born on September 21, 1983, in Knoxville, Tennessee, to Hugh and Mary Newsom. He was often called Chris by his friends and family. He attended Halls High School. There, he joined the baseball team, where he showcased impressive skills and teamwork. In 2002, he enrolled in Pellissippi State Technical Community College, a community college, to study carpentry. During this time, he met Shannon Christian, a beautiful girl who captivated him at first sight. Shannon was born on April 29, 1985, in Nacogdoches, Texas. Shannon, known for her beauty and kind nature, they developed a close relationship with each other. In 1997, the Christian family moved to Tennessee. Shannon graduated from Farragut High School in 2003 and then enrolled in the sociology program at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. During this time, she actively supported Christopher by attending his baseball games and traveling with him. They were often described as inseparable. Although they still lived with their parents, they dreamed of a future together. In the city of Knoxville, there lived a man named Lamarcus Davidson, who was originally from Memphis and was born on June 13, 1981. His childhood and teenage years were challenging. His mother struggled with severe substance addiction, and his father was an alcoholic. Lamarcus had a half-brother named Latalvis Cobbins. At the age of 16, Lamarcus had a chance to change his life but chose to pursue a criminal path, which quickly led him to prison. After prison, instead of turning his life around, Lamarcus began dealing illegal substances and became involved with a girl who was also entrenched in the banned substance. Unfortunately, Latalvis faced a similar fate. In 2003, Latalvis was convicted of attempted robbery in the third degree and served time. He was released on August 5, 2006, and moved to Knoxville, where he rented a room in a run-down house in the industrial area of the city. Lamarcus also tried to locate Latalvis, who was dating Vanessa Coleman. Lamarcus set off on a journey with his girlfriend. They arrived in Knoxville in early 2007. On January 5, Lamarcus and his girlfriend had a serious argument, which escalated to him hitting her. The next day, she chose to leave. On Saturday, January 6, 2007, Shannon and Christopher had plans for dinner and a party. Before meeting up, Shannon stopped by her friend's house to help her with makeup, hair, and outfit selection. They parted ways around 8 p.m., and Shannon began waiting for Christopher, who was coming from another part of town. At the same time, Lamarcus, along with his two friends George Thomas and Eric Boyd, formed a dangerous trio that arrived at Latalvis's place with a sinister plan. During their drive, they used banned substances and talked. Around midnight, Christopher and Shannon went to the parking lot of the apartment complex. Shannon got behind the wheel of her Toyota pickup, while Christopher leaned over next to her, keeping the door open. They shared a kiss. Suddenly, armed bandits appeared and attacked them. The criminals forced the frightened couple into the back seat of the truck and drove them to a rented house. Both Shannon and Christopher had their hands tied behind their backs. Later, it was revealed that Eric had distanced himself from the gang at that time. The next morning, January 7th, Shannon's mother, Dina Christian, woke up feeling uneasy because Shannon had not returned home and wasn't answering her phone. Dina's worry increased when Shannon's best friend called to say the couple hadn't shown up at the party. So, Dina contacted the rescue service. Realizing that the kidnapping victims were adults and that the authorities were not taking action, the families of them people decided to search for their children on their own. That evening, Lamarcus arrived at Daphne's house, his girlfriend, driving Shannon's car and wearing Christopher's sneakers, which were clearly too small for him. Daphne noticed these details and asked him to take her to the rented house so she could pick up her belongings, including clothes and cosmetics. When Daphne arrived, she saw Latalvis and George Thomas. They informed her that they couldn't get her belongings at that moment. Daphne was not allowed to enter the kitchen or the bedroom where Latalvis was currently holding Shannon. Feeling frustrated, Daphne left. Meanwhile, Shannon and Christopher were enduring a horrific ordeal. After being subjected to various forms of torture, Christopher was taken to the railroad tracks, dressed only in a shirt and underwear. They forced him to walk barefoot, blindfolded, with his hands bound and gagged. Suddenly, loud gunshots rang out, attacking Christopher in the neck and back. He did not die immediately, but the third attack to his head was fatal. Afterward, the attackers poured gasoline on him and set him on fire. Upon returning to the house, they subjected Shannon to abuse, which was incredibly brutal and lasted for several hours. They then bound her, put her in a garbage bag, and covered her with sheets. She was slowly dying from lack of oxygen. On January 8th, the burnt body of a man was discovered near the railroad tracks, and an examination confirmed it was Christopher. The investigators tasked with informing his mother, Mary. They had to caution her that the condition of the body would be horrifying. Nevertheless, she insisted on identifying him at the morgue. Mary placed her hand on the body bag and whispered to her son. The criminals left the rented house, and Lamericus chose to stay at Daphne's for a few nights. He claimed that his brother had suddenly disappeared with the apartment keys, making it impossible for him to get inside. Although Daphne was skeptical at first, she eventually believed him. Meanwhile, the other accomplices, Latalvis, Vanessa, and George returned to Kentucky. In her personal diary, Vanessa wrote about how exciting her life had become and the new experiences she had gained recently. On January 9th, police officers arrived at a rented house where a tragic incident had occurred. Inside, they found Shannon's lifeless body, which was sent for examination. The doctors concluded that both victims had suffered greatly. A corrosive chemical substance was found in Shannon's throat, on her body, and in the area of her injured genitals, indicating that she had been tortured while alive. Investigators also conducted a thorough examination, and the first thing that caught the investigators' eyes was that the floor was covered in dirt. Furthermore, a pack of cigarettes was found in the living room, even though neither Shannon nor Christopher smoked. Finally, the agent stumbled upon an envelope, and after it was subjected to a fingerprint analysis, it was linked to Lamericus. He had been involved in numerous crimes and had a criminal record. The detectives had no trouble determining his place of residence. The police department learned about the situation and intended to speak with Lamericus first. However, he had fled. He made a critical mistake by calling Eric, which agents overheard and recorded. They also located Daphne and convinced her to assist with the investigation. During her first interrogation, a frightened Daphne shared everything she knew and mentioned that Lamericus had pleaded with her to believe in his innocence. The detectives recorded everything on video, showing the disarray in the apartment. In addition to important shell casings, experts found video recordings, Christopher's shoes, binoculars, and a discharged .22 caliber revolver that matched the weapon used to kill Christopher. The case gained significant attention, reaching beyond the state, prompting the involvement of federal agents. Crucial information emerged about the video found in the apartment. It had been rented from a library in Kentucky by George Thomas. Meanwhile, the police needed a strategy to approach Lamericus and decided to start with Eric. Finding Eric was straightforward, and within hours, he was located and arrested. His attempts to shift the blame onto others failed due to the strong evidence linking him to the crime. That same day, Vanessa and Latalvis was also arrested. On January 12, 2007, Shannon's family made a public appeal seeking attention from the media while waiting for updates on the investigation. They expressed gratitude for the help they received in searching for the couple and organized prayers for the funeral. Unfortunately, due to the condition of Shannon's body, the family could not hold an open ceremony. All 5 suspects provided their accounts of the events, trying to blame each other, but they agreed that the attack was motivated by robbery. Eric was believed to be the main perpetrator and was also accused of knowing about the crime beforehand and failing to intervene. The other suspects admitted to being in the rented house during the incident. There was uncertainty about whether Vanessa participated in the violence willingly or was coerced. She was placed under protection, but after several interrogations, she eventually admitted that she actively took part in the attack. On January 25, 2007, a memorial service was held at the University of Tennessee campus to honor Shannon. A year later, a golf tournament was organized, and a victims' memorial fund was created. Additionally, scholarships were established for senior high school students from Shannon's alma mater. In memory of Christopher, Pellissippi College held an annual memorial baseball tournament at Halls Community Park. Halls High School has also awarded an annual scholarship in his name to the top baseball player. George, LaTalvis, and Vanessa faced charges related to the case. Initially, they were expected to be tried in separate trials from May to August 2008, but Eric was federally charged in the U.S. District Court. On April 16, 2008, Eric Boyd was found guilty on all counts, including theft and concealing a fugitive's whereabouts. He received the maximum sentence of 18 years in prison. George's attorneys requested a speedy trial, arguing that there was no evidence linking him to the crime scene. Their request was granted, and the trial was scheduled for August 2008, but it was postponed to 2009. At that time, District Attorney Randy Mickles announced that if LaTalvis and Vanessa were found guilty, the state would seek the death penalty. However, the trials for both LaTalvis and Vanessa, as well as George's trial, were delayed due to leaks to the press about the case details. The defense argued that a change of venue was necessary to ensure a fair trial, but this request was denied by Knox County Criminal Court Judge Richard Baumgartner. He convened a new jury in Nashville in November 2008. The house where the victims were killed was purchased by a company and quickly demolished. The new owners planned to build a memorial for Shannon and Christopher on the site. By the end of August the following year, LaTalvis was scheduled to stand trial. During his testimony, he admitted to lying several times during his interrogation but stated that he would only tell the truth now that he was under oath. On the first day of deliberation, the jury met for about 10 hours. The following morning, the verdict was announced. LaTalvis Cobbins was found guilty of both murders but was acquitted of abuse assault charges. On August 26, 2009, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 2 months later, Lamaricus went to trial. A key piece of evidence against him was the testimony of a medical examiner who conducted the autopsy. Her detailed testimony about the victim's injuries left those in court in disbelief. A particularly shocking moment occurred and autopsy photographs were shown. The prosecutor's assistant fainted, leading to a brief recess during which Judge Richard warned that anyone who cried would be removed from the courtroom. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours and identified many new factors that increased the severity of the charges. These included the various methods used to inflict pain on the victims. Lamaricus Davidson was found guilty of first-degree aggravated robbery and first-degree murder. Additionally, he was convicted for his involvement in abuse assaults against Christopher and for committing violence against Shannon. The sentencing hearing began on October 28, 2009, at 9 a.m. and was expected to continue until Friday. The prosecutors aimed for the death penalty and called upon the victims' relatives to share their testimonies and emotions. Shannon's younger brother spoke about the importance of his sister in his life, while Dina, in a calm and measured tone, shared the devastating impact that losing her daughter had on her. Judge Richard described these crimes as some of the most inhumane cases he had ever encountered and stated that no punishment could be deemed sufficient for the murders committed. Jurors unanimously recommended that Lamaricus Davidson receive the death penalty on 4 counts of capital murder, 2 counts of first-degree murder, and 2 counts of premeditated first-degree murder against Christopher and Shannon. Dina later stated that she and her family were pleased with the sentence, feeling that justice had been achieved. Hugh, Christopher's father, hoped that other court cases would result in similar outcomes. Meanwhile, the media continued to cover the situation, leading to new theories. Some people suggested that the crimes were racially motivated because both Shannon and Christopher were white, while their attackers were black. This sparked a rally organized by white nationalists, which prompted another group to protest against them. The protesters insisted that there was no link between the crime and the race of the victims, emphasizing that the incident started with the carjacking of Shannon. They also made it clear that they had no association with the rally or its organizers. On December 8, 2009, George Thomas was found guilty of all charges against him. The specific charges included 2 counts of murder with extreme cruelty and 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. His case relied entirely on circumstantial evidence and witness testimony. The sentencing hearing occurred the same day and continued until December 10. The jury deliberated for approximately 3 hours and returned the sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole for each of the 4 capital convictions. Vanessa's situation became a significant legal challenge. Although federal authorities granted her immunity, intending to make her a key witness in a federal auto theft case, state courts did not agree to release her. They ruled that federal immunity did not apply to state charges of murder and abuse assault. On May 13, 2010, Vanessa Coleman was found not guilty of first-degree murder and the crimes against Christopher. However, she was still punished for her involvement in other serious offenses, including kidnapping, abuse assault, and murder related to Shannon's case. On July 30, 2010, she was sentenced to 53 years in prison. 4 years later, just as the victims' families were starting to heal from their trauma, a shocking development raised doubts about the fairness of the trial. In March 2011, Judge Richard, who had presided over the case, revealed that he was stepping down due to banned substance addiction. The state Supreme Court then upheld the decisions made in the cases against George and Vanessa and ordered new hearings. In the second trial, Vanessa's diary became crucial evidence for prosecutors. They aimed to show Vanessa's connection to the crimes that occurred that night, using statements Vanessa had written in her diary during the days leading up to Shannon and Christopher's deaths. This evidence raised significant questions about her claims of innocence. Despite this, Vanessa maintained that she had accidentally ended up in that house and was a victim of circumstances. Her lawyer argued that her diary entries were nonsensical attempts, suggesting that the torture and murder of the victims were irrelevant to her at all. He informed the jury that Lamarcus attacked Vanessa when she tried to leave the house and that he threatened her when she mentioned seeking help. On May 17, 2013, the judge ruled on a sentencing case, stating that it was the most complex and horrific case he had ever encountered. A new trial for George resulted in a guilty verdict, with the jury once again recommending a life sentence but with the possibility of parole. Shortly after, Supreme Court Judge Walter Kurtz upheld the jury's decision, sentencing George Thomas to 2 consecutive life sentences for murder and an additional 25 years for abuse offenses. While Christopher's parents were relieved that justice was served, they remained determined to hold George's accomplices accountable as well. They made every effort to contact him, and after 11 years following the tragic events, he finally disclosed details about his collaborators in various crimes. On March 20, 2018, a Knox County grand jury returned a 36-count indictment against Eric Boyd. He was transferred from a federal correctional institution in Yazoo City, Mississippi, and was held at the Knox County Jail, where he was being held on $1 million bail. Eric finally went to trial on state charges in August 2019. Co-defendant George Thomas testified at the trial of Eric Boyd. In exchange for his testimony, George was allowed to have his first-degree murder convictions reduced to second-degree murder, his aggravated abuse convictions reduced to aggravated assault, and his sentence reduced from life in prison with the possibility of parole to 50 years. Thus, on August 13, 2019, Eric Boyd was found guilty on 36 counts of murder and invasion of privacy, receiving a life sentence plus an additional 90 years in prison. Every year, the families of Shannon and Christopher hold a memorial walk to honor the couple. In 2022, many cyclists participated in the event, riding through the streets of Knoxville. This act became a meaningful show of respect for the grieving families, allowing people to express their remembrance and love for the victims. The organizers of the event announced their intention to continue the bike ride annually to raise public awareness about the tragic events. One can only hope that this tragic case, which took the lives of young people, will serve as an important lesson for someone. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Jasmine Pace. Jasmine Pace, a 22-year-old college student, planned to spend Thanksgiving 2022 with her family. However, her plans suddenly changed, leaving her mother surprised. At the last moment, she sent a message canceling the family gathering. Shortly afterward, a new post appeared on Jasmine's Facebook page that read, "Enjoy Thanksgiving with my baby," accompanied by a photo that raised concerns. Initially confused, her family's concern quickly escalated into panic when they realized something was wrong. Jasmine was missing, and someone seemed to be impersonating her online. On the night of November 22, 2022, Jasmine drove a white Chevy Equinox away from her home in Chattanooga, Tennessee, at approximately 11:30 p.m. Later, her mother, Katrina Bean, received a text from Jasmine's phone stating that she would spend the rest of the week at her friend Emma's house. Since Jasmine was grieving the recent loss of her grandmother to cancer, her decision to skip the family gathering didn't immediately alarm her loved ones. She often withdrew for short periods to cope with her emotions. But everything took a troubling turn when Jasmine made a Facebook post. The post featured Jasmine in an uncharacteristically revealing outfit, which surprised her mother. What alarmed her father, Travis Pace, was even more troubling. Jasmine's extensive tattoos were missing from the photo. Each tattoo represented a timeline in her life, added months apart, creating a distinctive pattern, especially on her right arm. The glaring absence of these tattoos confirmed the post was fake, and Jasmine's family realized the situation was far worse than they had imagined. Katrina reached out to Jasmine's friend Emma and confirmed what she had suspected. Jasmine had been missing from her family for a week, contradicting the claims in a recent message. Several other friends and family members had also received suspicious messages supposedly from Jasmine, all of which raised concerns. The family immediately began searching for her. Jasmine's SUV, equipped with a GPS feature from the My Chevrolet app, allowed her mother to track its location. The car was found parked outside a building on Mountain Creek Road in Chattanooga. By the time it was discovered, it was 8:30 p.m. on November 26th, 4 days after Jasmine was last seen leaving her mother's house late on the evening of the 22nd. The area where the car was located was unfamiliar to the family, and as far as they knew, Jasmine didn't know anyone there. When they approached the car, they noticed that the driver's seat was pushed far back, suggesting that someone much taller than the petite Jasmine had been driving. The family contacted the police, who arrived on the scene and filed a report describing the situation. Katrina also reached out to the family's cell phone provider. Since Jasmine was part of their family plan, her mother, Katrina, had access to her phone records. The records revealed that there had been no calls from Jasmine's phone for several days. In the presence of the police, Katrina began calling the numbers listed in the call log. One number stood out, a call with someone Jasmine had spoken to for over an hour on the night of the 22nd. When Katrina dialed that number, it connected to a young man named Jason, whom Jasmine had recently met on a dating app. Jason, a computer science student at a university in Chattanooga, had been casually dating Jasmine for a few months. Their relationship was not serious, so Jasmine never introduced him to her parents, Katrina and Travis, who didn't know him. When Jasmine was reported missing, Jason claimed he hadn't heard from her in several days and that their last conversation had been brief. However, Katrina found his behavior suspicious and felt he might be lying. His apparent lack of concern further alarmed her. Despite Katrina urging the police to dig deeper, they refused, arguing that Jasmine was an adult and there was no clear evidence of foul play. Determined to find their daughter, Katrina and Travis began knocking on doors throughout the apartment complex on Mountain Creek Road. Unfortunately, no neighbors had seen Jasmine. They sought help from the apartment guard, who provided security camera footage. The video showed a white Chevrolet entering the parking lot. By cross-referencing this footage with timestamps from the My Chevrolet app, they pinpointed the general time frame but couldn't identify the driver. Katrina then noticed an unread text message from Jasmine, sent on November 23rd. The message included a location and timestamp, showing Jasmine's device had been at a specific place at 2:18 a.m. This was highly unusual, as Jasmine had never sent such cryptic messages, especially during the night. Acting quickly, Katrina and Travis went straight to the address mentioned in the message. Jasmine's parents, Katrina and Travis, knocked on every door in the building, paying particular attention to room 210. Neighbors mentioned hearing a loud noise from that unit around 2:15 a.m. on November 23rd. Upon investigation, Katrina and Travis quickly discovered that the tenant of the apartment was Jason. The unit was quite small, consisting of a kitchenette near the sofa, a hallway leading to the bedroom, and a single bathroom. From the front door, they could see a small duffel bag filled with cleaning supplies sitting on the kitchen table. While searching, Travis found Jasmine's driver's license and credit cards in a drawer. They called the police again, but after speaking with Katrina and the neighbors, the officers left, citing a lack of immediate evidence of foul play. Frustrated by the lack of action, Katrina went back to the apartment several times over the next few hours. She collected items like laptops, electronics, cell phones, a camera, and an iPad, anything that might offer clues to her daughter's whereabouts. She and Travis also searched the trash cans outside the building. Nearly at midnight, the police finally returned to room 210 with a search warrant and officially began their investigation. During the inspection, they observed suspicious stains resembling blood in multiple areas, on the wooden floor in the living room, the linoleum in the bathroom, and the carpet in the bedroom. They also discovered blood stains on the bathroom doors and walls. The substantial amount of cleaning supplies found in the apartment further heightened suspicions. At the scene, police seized a pair of white sneakers and blue pants for further investigation. In the living room, broken glass fragments hinted at a possible violent altercation. In the bedroom, the furniture appeared to have been moved, suggesting attempts to conceal signs of a struggle. This discovery led investigators to focus more intently on piecing together the unsettling clues surrounding Jasmine's disappearance. In some parts of the apartment, it was evident that furniture had been rearranged to hide evidence. A kitchen knife was found on the bed, and stains that could potentially be blood were present in nearly every room. A forensic team was brought in to apply a specialized solution designed to detect traces of blood. The investigation shifted from a missing persons case to a murder inquiry. Detectives obtained CCTV footage from the apartment building and nearby areas to construct a timeline of Jason Chen's movements, hoping it would lead to locating Jasmine Pace. Investigators confirmed that Jasmine arrived at 110 Tremont before midnight on November 22. Her Chevrolet was seen entering the building's parking lot and later leaving, with investigators tracking the vehicle to the apartment complex where Jason lived. The day after her arrival, Jasmine was recorded leaving the building, wearing a hoodie. A surveillance camera at the apartment's entrance captured Jason leaving multiple times, including at 7:30 p.m. Just 3 minutes later, someone in a light-colored sweatshirt was seen driving Jasmine's SUV to the Signal View condo, where the vehicle was abandoned. On November 23, 2022, Jason took several suspicious trips. In the morning, he went to Walmart and purchased hydrogen peroxide, cleaning supplies, and a pair of white sneakers, which were clearly visible on the store's surveillance footage. These sneakers were later found discarded in a trash can near the apartment complex. That evening, Jason visited Ukraine to buy a pack of paper towels. Between the Walmart trip and disposing of some clothes, investigators believe Jason was attempting to conceal evidence. His movements were monitored through various surveillance videos across Chattanooga, where his distinctive white sweatshirt made him easily identifiable even in blurry footage. Around 6 p.m. on the 23rd, a man in a white sweatshirt was filmed struggling to move a large suitcase from the apartment entrance to the parking lot. Shortly afterward, Jason's black Toyota Camry was seen driving away. On November 29th, a week after Jasmine's disappearance, Jason was found at his parents' home. The arresting officers in Nolanville observed cuts on Jason's arms and legs, suggesting a violent encounter. A search warrant was issued for the home, resulting in the seizure of a black backpack and handwritten notes from the room Jason had been staying in. The notes appeared to show him trying to construct his version of the incident. Detectives discovered Jason had last seen Jasmine on November 19th, according to notes he made. He claimed they had spoken and mentioned that Jasmine struggled with mental health issues. Jason seemingly prepared for his eventual questioning by portraying Jasmine as homeless. During a search of Jason's backpack, detectives found his phone and a SIM card removed from Jasmine's phone. Upon examining Jason's phone, investigators recovered a photo of Jasmine standing in his bathroom on the night she disappeared. They also found screenshots of text messages from Jasmine, though the content of the messages was missing. The morning following Jasmine's apparent death, Jason sent her a photo captioned, "Slept like a baby," followed by a text later that day saying, "We'll meet again tonight." Metadata revealed the photo had been taken 2 years earlier. Jasmine's phone records showed she visited Walmart with Jason on the morning she disappeared, but surveillance footage only captured Jason shopping alone. Investigators traced Jason's movements, revealing that he loaded a large suitcase into his Toyota Camry and drove to Suck Creek Road near the riverbank. On December 1st, Thursday, investigators found a suitcase along the riverbank. It belonged to Jason and contained Jasmine's body. She was wrapped in 3 garbage bags and restrained with handcuffs. Her right hand was cuffed to her right ankle, while her left ankle was cuffed to her right elbow. The handcuffs were basic models, not police issue, with one chain broken. An autopsy confirmed Jasmine had been fatally attacked, with the bullet concentrated in a single area of her body. In December 2022, Jason Chen's bail was set at $5 million, sparking outrage due to the disturbing details of Jasmine's murder. Many believed he shouldn't have been offered bail at all. Evidence revealed that Jason had accessed Jasmine's phone and SIM card to manage her bank account and post fake messages after her death. During his opening statement on the first day of court proceedings, lawyer Josh Weiss did not claim his client's innocence. He acknowledged that Jason killed Jasmine but argued that it was unintentional. The prosecution did not pursue the death penalty. If convicted of first-degree murder, Jason faces life in prison without the possibility of parole. His best chance for a lighter sentence would be to plead to a lesser charge, such as manslaughter. To do this, the defense aimed to convince the jury that Jason killed Jasmine in a moment of passion, having been provoked into an extreme emotional reaction that resulted in her death. The defense's arguments suggested that they had been drinking wine late at night at Jason's home, and that Jasmine had gone to the kitchen to get water. While there, she allegedly heard constant notifications from a dating app on Jason's phone. This led to an argument between the two, during which Jasmine reportedly attacked Jason with a broken wine glass. Jason, who had earlier taken a kitchen knife to his bedroom to open a bottle of wine, used the knife during the struggle. The defense explained the stains on Jasmine's body as part of an incident that occurred after the attack. They claimed Jason panicked after the attack and handcuffed Jasmine to fit her into a suitcase. Video recordings from Jason and Jasmine's phones, along with testimony from neighbors, provided a timeline of the murder and Jason's attempts to cover it up. Neighbor Courtney Brewer testified to hearing an argument after 2 a.m. The reconstruction of the murder relied heavily on the physical evidence found at the crime scene, but this is where the case became complicated. Police applied a chemical to various items at the crime scene, including a broken knife. Katrina inspected and searched the crime scene. The defense later called its expert to highlight significant changes observed between the initial police response and the scene's documentation. Furniture had been moved, and questions arose about whether certain items were relevant evidence. Travis testified that, when he initially entered the room with Katrina to find their daughter, he didn't see a knife on the bed. The medical examiner determined the attack was deliberate and found no suspicious evidence contradicting this conclusion. Based on the location of the wounds, Jasmine was likely in a fetal position during the assault. The handcuffs she wore were most likely applied while she was still alive. Additionally, the medical examiner found no alcohol in her system, which contradicted Jason's claim that they had been drinking wine. Jason's argument that Jasmine provoked him by becoming angry over dating app notifications was proven false. A state expert reviewed the app's data and confirmed no notifications were received. Jason chose not to testify in his defense. Evidence was presented quickly. Jason's lawyer withdrew support for his initial story, instead highlighting the absence of handcuff marks on Jasmine's wrists, which would have been visible if she had been alive when restrained. The presence of handcuffs suggested that the attack was premeditated. The number of wounds indicated that Jason had sufficient time to think through and carry out the assault. During closing arguments, prosecutor Cody Vamp outlined the sequence of events, including Courtney Brewer hearing someone running to the apartment door at 2 a.m. The jury began deliberating after the final arguments and delivered a verdict shortly afterward. One juror confirmed that the repeated visits by Jasmine Pace's family to the crime scene did not influence their decision. At the sentencing phase, jurors had to decide whether Jason Chen should ever be eligible for parole. Jason's attorney appealed to the jury, asking them to grant his client a chance for redemption. However, the jury deliberated for less than an hour and ultimately convicted Jason Chen of first-degree murder, sentencing him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Following the conviction, Jasmine Pace's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Jason Chen's parents. They accused the parents of harboring Jason, giving him money, and sharing information during the days after the murder while he was the prime suspect and their daughter was still missing. The loss of Jasmine and the ensuing legal battles deeply affected the Pace family. After the sentencing, the trials surrounding Jason Chen, referred to by the family as a monster, were marked by overwhelming grief. Prosecutors condemned his crime as heinous, cruel, and inhumane. At around 4 p.m. on Friday, April 15, 2011, in Lourdes, France, 27-year-old Alexander Durand was on his way home when he received a call from his younger sister, Séverine. She was a high school student, and the siblings had a close relationship, often calling each other. However, today she called not to share good news or weekend plans. Instead, she informed him that their mother, Colette, had not picked her up after school as she usually did. The day before, Séverine had been with their father, who had taken her to school in the morning. She had tried calling their mother multiple times, but her calls went unanswered. This was unusual because their mother was normally very responsible, and there was no reason for her not to come and pick up her daughter. Séverine was worried that something might have happened, such as an accident. She advised Alexander to check the situation and visit their mother's house. Alexander was also worried, so he called his mother several times, but received no response. Finally, he decided to visit his mother's house himself. When Alexander arrived, Séverine was already there, but she was still very anxious, even more than before. She was in the house with the gendarmes, and what they discovered was very concerning. Colette's car was parked in the driveway, the doors were unlocked, and the keys were in the ignition. 52-year-old Colette had vanished without a trace. The keys to the house were also in the car, so Alexander took them and went inside to see what was happening. The house was completely empty, as if she had simply disappeared. The gendarmes quickly began their search for Colette since the situation was becoming increasingly alarming. Initially, they suspected a robbery, but they found that nothing was stolen from the house. The doors and windows were untouched. In the back seat of the car, they discovered Colette's purse, which held all her identification, bank cards, and cash. She could not have left willingly without those items. Tension heightened. Even after 3 hours of searching, there was still no news. Both the house and the car were thoroughly examined, but no leads emerged. As a result, the search area was expanded to include the outskirts of the town. None of the neighbors had seen anything out of the ordinary, no suspicious noises or activity near Colette's home. To learn more about her, the police interviewed her relatives. Colette, a divorced mother of 4, was known for her reserved and calm demeanor. She was not someone who would spontaneously disappear. She had no mental health issues or addictions. At the time, Colette was working as a supermarket manager. She was polite, punctual, and a devoted mother. Everyone who knew her was confused and did not understand what had happened, as she had no troubling relationships and no history of violence. The evidence suggested that Colette's disappearance was not accidental. The police believed that whoever was involved in this incident was someone she was very familiar with. At the very least, Colette had allowed this person into her house or had given them the right to enter. After investigating, the police identified the primary suspect. She lived by herself in a small two-story house. To save on expenses, she rented the first floor to a man named Bernard. During his interview, Bernard made some strange and unsettling remarks. He speculated on how Colette might have been abducted, suggesting that she could have been struck on the back of the head, rendering her unable to call for help. He also provided a detailed account of her medical condition, noting that she was diabetic and needed urgent assistance to avoid serious health consequences. His level of knowledge about Colette raised suspicions among the police. Furthermore, Colette's son, Alexander, revealed that Bernard was in love with his mother, which could explain his insight into her behavior and routines. This revelation increased suspicions, as Bernard could potentially have a motive. Alexander noted that, despite Bernard's interest, his mother did not reciprocate and had no intention of developing anything beyond friendship. She was solely focused on her children and her work, completely dismissing the idea of a romantic relationship with Bernard. When detectives investigated Bernard's background, they found that he had a criminal history. In 1999, he assaulted his girlfriend with a weapon after she tried to end their relationship. His ex described him as very hot-tempered and unable to control his rage. As a result of these incidents, suspicions about Bernard increased. Colette's lack of interest may have caused him to become angry, and what happened next remains unclear. In 1999, Bernard received a brief 6-year prison sentence for an attack, mainly because the girl he attacked survived. Now, he was called to the police station for questioning as the primary suspect in Colette's disappearance. The police were trying to determine when Colette went missing, and Bernard claimed to have useful information. He reported that on the afternoon of April 14, 2011, while watching television, he heard noises coming from the second floor, where Colette had lived. He could hear footsteps on the wooden floor, but then everything went quiet. He did not see Colette leave, making it likely that he was the last person to have seen her. However, the police were concerned about Bernard's behavior. He was unable to recall the exact time of the noises or even remember what show he was watching, raising further suspicions. Bernard's main problem was that he didn't have a verifiable alibi. However, there was no evidence against him, so the police had to let him go. The next morning, officers came to inspect his house. Bernard greeted them with shouts and was initially unwilling to let them enter. Eventually, he agreed to show them around the first floor of the rented property but continued to make odd comments. Notably, he pointed out a hatch that led to the basement. He remarked that if he had killed someone, he would have hidden the body there, yet he insisted he was innocent and claimed the basement was empty. Upon inspection, there was indeed no one there. Meanwhile, when law enforcement searched Colette's home, they discovered suspicious stains believed to be washed blood, but this could not be confirmed. Despite the lack of evidence, suspicion remained around Bernard. Deciding to keep a close watch on him, the detectives sought to establish the exact time of Colette's disappearance, but clues were scarce. She had been alone for several days with minimal contact with her neighbor until April 15th. Anything could have happened during that time. Investigators began to piece together her movements, partly based on Bernard's statement that he had heard loud noises from the floor above on April 14th, the day before she vanished. As the investigators looked into the case, they realized that no one had seen Colette since April 15th. They managed to locate her friend, who stated that he had last seen Colette on April 14th around 3:30 p.m. at a gathering with mutual friends. He mentioned that after leaving the party, she got into her car intending to drive to Draguignan but planned to stop at home first. This was the only information available and was considered a starting point for the investigation, as more than 40 hours had passed since she went missing. Communicating with Colette's friend helped them determine a rough timeline for when she went missing. In her car, investigators found not only her personal belongings but also her mobile phone. They began analyzing the phone to see whom Colette had communicated with in the hours leading up to her disappearance. Notably, there was a call that lasted about 40 seconds, made shortly before 3:30 p.m. The call was from Sylviane Fabre, Colette's ex-husband's sister. Sylviane was contacted, and she stated that she had met Colette during Colette's marriage to her brother. At that time, Colette's relationship with her husband was not very good, so they decided to separate. However, afterward, the former spouses and their families managed to maintain friendly relations. Sylviane mentioned that back in 2008, they collaborated with Colette to invest money in a joint business. Shortly before Colette's disappearance, the business partners had a small conflict regarding these assets, but Sylviane claimed that everything was resolved, and they continued to work together. Together, Sylviane and Colette created a real estate company that generated a substantial income, which provided Sylviane with a potential motive. Not only were they distant relatives, but they also had shared finances and property, which can often lead to such conflicts. Naturally, Sylviane denied any wrongdoing. Colette's daughter mentioned that Sylviane often had conflicts regarding their joint activities. They could argue and reconcile several times a day. However, Colette's daughter described all these disputes as minor issues that were resolved quickly. The gendarmes checked Sylviane's schedule for the last few days. She had an alibi confirmed by her son. For almost the entire duration of the investigation, suspicions against Sylviane were not substantiated, and the search operation again hit a dead end. On April 17, 2011, the prosecutor's office began a judicial investigation into the disappearance of Colette. With no leads left and all suspicious individuals cleared as unlikely suspects, there was no option but to notify the media and hope, with their assistance, to obtain new witnesses who might have noticed something. At a recent press conference, officials announced that while there were priority leads in the criminal investigation, no suspects had been identified. This news sparked significant interest among journalists, as the case could potentially involve themes of business, money, love, or betrayal. Consequently, rumors began circulating about Colette immediately, some of which were quite alarming. Her information, background, and photos quickly became prominent in newspapers and on television. Her children expressed their desire to see her again and shared how difficult her absence was for them. The most concerning aspect was that the critical 48-hour window for finding her alive had already passed, significantly diminishing the chances of a successful rescue. While the prosecutor's office hoped to gather new leads from the public through the media, the police were actively searching the nearby villages. Following the press conference, the search area was widened, and a special investigative unit took over the case. Colette's disappearance began to attract national attention. The media frenzy intensified as they attempted to connect her case with another notorious crime that had recently shaken France. A few days before Colette went missing in early April 2011, 5 members of the Dupont de Ligonnès family, including the wife and 4 children, were found murdered under the terrace of their home in Nantes. The head of the family, Xavier, disappeared shortly after the murders, having been spotted on the outskirts of the city on April 15. Authorities believe Xavier was responsible for the crime, and he was placed on a nationwide wanted list. Notably, the location of the massacre was only 30 kilometers from Colette's home. The media quickly linked these incidents together. The timing coincided with Colette's likely disappearance, raising the possibility that Xavier kidnapped her. An even stranger coincidence was that the Dupont de Ligonnès family lived in a house that Colette had sold in 1992. Xavier was viewed as a respectable citizen, a devoted husband, and a caring father who was engaged in his community and known for his honesty and fairness. However, it later emerged that Xavier was deep in debt at the time he murdered his family. Just days before the killings, he purchased cement, tools, and 4 bags of lime, suggesting he had a motive and was preparing for the crime. Journalists speculated that Xavier may have had a grudge against Colette, but the reason for his potential revenge remained unclear. Rumors spread quickly, with theories ranging from a fraudulent real estate deal to unrequited love. Others suspected it could be part of a planned escape, Xavier could have taken Colette so they could be together again. Witnesses came forward, claiming they had seen Xavier's car near her home. Some even reported seeing him stop in town on April 14th. Although these accounts seemed unlikely, detectives noticed clear connections between Xavier and Colette. This led them to investigate the possibility that the two had escaped together. Consequently, Colette shifted from being seen as a victim to potentially being viewed as an accomplice in crimes that might have involved Xavier's family. However, friends and family of Colette quickly disputed this theory, asserting that she was not capable of cruelty. As detectives explored new leads that emerged almost daily, they became convinced that there was no romantic or conspiratorial link between Xavier and Colette. They began to feel that the similarities between Xavier and Colette were merely coincidental or tragic coincidences. To definitively eliminate this theory, they decided to examine both Xavier's and Colette's mobile phones. They encountered a challenge. Xavier's phone could not be tracked, and there were no calls or messages from Colette's phone to his. After their investigation, they found no evidence of any contact between the two after the sale of the house. Although the theory regarding Xavier was intriguing, it ultimately consumed valuable police time and resources. 3 weeks after Colette's disappearance, any possible link to Xavier was dismissed. Xavier himself was never found, leaving the French police at an impasse. The case has reached a dead end and will not make any progress until at least May 15, 2011. On this day, about 30 kilometers from Lorgues, 2 tourists were returning from a forest hike and taking photos. While using a remote path to capture some scenic shots, they were hit by a strong, unpleasant smell coming from the side of the path. One of the tourists decided to investigate the source of the odor. As the woman approached a pile of stones, the smell intensified and became unbearable. When she moved one of the stones, she discovered a leg protruding from beneath the rocks. The tourists quickly called the police. Within minutes, gendarmes arrived at the location and found the body of a woman in an advanced state of decomposition, making it difficult to determine her gender. Only her clothing provided a clue. The police attempted to identify the victim but were initially unsuccessful. They took photographs of her clothes, accessories, and jewelry, which were then shown to the families of various women who had gone missing in the area. Among those families were the children of Colette. Her daughter and son recognized their mother based on what she was wearing. Although the gendarmes believed they had identified Colette a month after her disappearance, they chose to wait for more conclusive evidence. DNA analysis was necessary to confirm family ties, as appearance alone could not provide definitive proof. Ultimately, the examination verified the police's suspicions. The body was indeed identified as Colette Durand. On May 17, 2011, an autopsy was conducted on the body that had been found at the Forensic Medical Institute. Unfortunately, the condition of the remains was so poor that the exact cause of death could not be determined. The forensic expert did confirm that Colette had not been abused before her death, but it did not help the police make much progress in the case. As a result, the investigation into her disappearance shifted focus to a murder investigation. On June 9, 2011, Colette's body was buried. Law enforcement officers attended the funeral, knowing that criminals sometimes show up at such events to witness the impact of their actions. Some may seek to relive their emotions, while others might derive satisfaction from seeing the grief of the victim's family. Several officers remained in vehicles, while others blended in with the attendees, discreetly observing the proceedings. During this time, the police noted that Sylvian, Colette's business partner and sister-in-law, was missing from the funeral. Although Sylvian and Colette were close, Sylvian's absence raised suspicions. This concern increased a few days later when Sylvian attempted to end her life. Although she survived with minor injuries and poisoning, her actions were alarming. When the police arrived after a call from Sylvian's neighbor, they found Sylvian lying on her couch at home. She was unable to fully express herself, so she was taken to a medical center for assistance. However, the officers did not leave empty-handed. They discovered a lengthy letter addressed to her son, David Perel, which was several pages long. While the letter did not contain explicit confessions regarding her actions concerning Colette, the detectives interpreted it as a potential admission of guilt prior to her death. The police decided to speak with David, and he provided new insights into the troubled relationship between Sylvian and Colette. He believed that shortly before Colette's death, she and Sylvian had experienced a serious conflict related to their shared business. Intrigued, the detectives asked David to recount his activities on April 14th. He described the daytime as uneventful, but his account of the evening was much more compelling. On April 14th, at around 10 p.m., Sylvian asked David to drive her to Colette's house to discuss some important business matters. Her own car was broken, so she turned to him for help. However, on their way, his car also broke down a few kilometers from home. Despite the rain, they decided to walk back instead. He took the car battery with them, and together they returned in an attempt to fix the car. On the night Colette disappeared, this mother and son spent hours in the rain attempting to repair a car left outside the city. The gendarmes suspected that David was trying to create a questionable alibi to explain his absence from home. This suspicion was further fueled by Sylvian's initial statement to the detectives, in which she claimed she had spent the previous days at home. It seemed implausible that she could forget such a significant event. When Sylvian regained consciousness in the medical center, her account of the events changed. Her new story mirrored what her son had previously told, including all the important details. The gendarmes decided to investigate her claims. They found that on the night of April 14th to 15th, there was no rain in the area. Additionally, it was odd that Sylvian and her son were unable to flag down a passing car for a ride home. Why did they walk so far while carrying a battery with them? The road's vehicle monitoring system revealed that approximately 5 cars passed by during the time they were walking home. It seemed unlikely that none of these drivers would have stopped to assist them in the rain. This raised suspicions that David and Sylvian were hiding something and might be involved in the death of Colette. Unfortunately, there was no physical evidence to support these suspicions. As a result, the decision was made to keep a close watch on them over the next few months. Their phone calls were monitored, and on February 8, 2012, this surveillance yielded important information. The police intercepted a conversation between Sylvian and Bernard, who was Colette's neighbor. It became clear that Bernard knew much more than he had initially revealed. On April 14th, he not only heard sounds coming from above but also saw Sylvian's car arrive at the house, indicating he was aware of her actions. David, Sylvian's son, was also involved, as he was driving for his mother. On February 20th, 2012, David and Sylvian were arrested. Detectives viewed David as the weak link. During questioning, he quickly confessed, seeming relieved to unburden himself of his guilt. He revealed that on April 14th, they arrived at Colette's home around 3:30 p.m. Afterward, Sylvian lured her into a barn behind the house. A business dispute led to further conflict, during which Sylvian attacked Colette, beating her to the ground. Then, she took a rope from the barn and began to strangle Colette in front of David. Although he did not intervene or participate in the attack, he admitted to helping move the body afterward. They left Colette's body on the property, covering it with a tarpaulin. In the evening, when they fabricated the story about the broken car, they took the body out of town. David assisted Sylvian in dragging the deceased away from the road and covering her with stones. Despite David's confession, Sylvian denied any wrongdoing. She claimed the death was accidental and that they hid the body out of fear of the police. However, it was puzzling how well prepared she seemed for the crime, as she had latex gloves that prevented her from leaving fingerprints. After being detained for 48 hours, Sylvian was charged with murder, while David was released. Though he was viewed as an accomplice, his testimony needed verification, so he remained under judicial supervision. The next step was to determine the motive. It turned out that the motive was linked to financial issues. Sylvian's business was on the brink of failure when Colette uncovered that Sylvian was embezzling money from clients. Another possible motive was jealousy, as Colette was thriving while Sylvian's problems continued to grow. Shortly before the tragedy, Sylvian had gone through a painful divorce, and one of her 2 sons had been convicted of violence. Communication between her and David had nearly ceased, and his involvement in the crime marked the end of their close relationship. On January 21, 2014, David was charged in court with the murder of Colette. He claimed that he was only an accomplice and that he helped hide the body due to pressure from his mother. Sylviane, his mother, argued that the incident was an act of involuntary manslaughter. She explained that she had lost her temper after a conflict with her business partner, Colette, who was trying to take everything from her. Facing life in prison, Sylviane sought to downplay her guilt. The prosecutor's office looked into the role of the tenant, Bernard. Although he witnessed the conflict between Sylviane and Colette, he did not report it because he feared Sylviane. Ultimately, he testified as a witness for the prosecution. On January 23, 2014, the jury found Sylviane Fabre guilty of manslaughter, sentencing her to 30 years in prison. Bernard was acquitted, and David Perel received a 3-year suspended sentence. Over the years, Colette's children struggled to understand what had happened in that barn with their mother. Despite the complicated trial, they felt uncertain that the entire truth had been uncovered. They were unhappy with the court's verdict, believing that Sylviane had committed premeditated murder but had received a lenient sentence. Additionally, they felt Bernard was more involved than he had admitted and had evaded responsibility for the crime. The case of Colette Durand is a tragic and mysterious story that leaves many unanswered questions for her family and the community. Colette, a devoted mother, suddenly disappeared, leading to a lengthy investigation filled with suspicions of love, money, and betrayal. Ultimately, the truth was revealed through David's confession and Sylviane's sentencing, but was justice truly served? Bernard, the neighbor with a murky past, remains a significant question mark as he evades all charges. For Colette's children, the pain lies not only in losing their mother but also in the feeling that the secrets surrounding their mother's death may be buried forever.